From this moment onward, consider this space ours. Outsiders, hit the road. Hold up, what's the deal here? What's got both of you fired up? Right after my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law launched into a relentless tirade against me. My husband tried to intervene, but they kept on going. You're being deceived. Maybe someone's got you under a spell, they jeered. Yep, it's all because your mom coddled you. She's the one who molded you into this. It's all on her. When they started disrespecting my late mother, I snapped. I can handle them trash-talking me, but I won't stand for it when it comes to my mom. I'm Kathy, 35 years young. My husband David, just a tad older, and I crossed paths at work and tied the knot 5 years back. We used to share our space with my mom, creating quite the dynamic household. Looking back, these past 5 years have been a whirlwind. It all started at my dad's real estate firm half a decade ago. With a knack for understanding the ebb and flow of both people and money, I pursued economics in college and applied that know-how to my career. Yet, amidst my strides, there were whispers. Some attributed my success solely to my parentage, dubbing me the boss's daughter instead of acknowledging me by name. And then there was David, the golden boy of sales in the same company, drawing attention from all corners, leaving me on the receiving end of more than a few icy glares. Don't get me wrong, I'm not naive enough to claim all my achievements as solely my own. It's the collective effort of those around me. Still, it grated on me, being boxed in as just the boss's daughter. These trying times, my father passed away. With my brother stepping into his shoes as president, the disdainful glances directed at me only grew sharper. Must have botched something up if your brother's taking the reins now. Guess we'll just call you the president's sister, huh? Normally, I might have brushed it off, but in the wake of my father's funeral, those words cut deep. Mentally exhausted, I found myself grappling with a singular question. What do I truly desire? Even as I tried to soldier on, I felt a void, a lack of inspiration. And then, almost impulsively, I uttered those fateful words to my husband David. I want to be an investor. Instead of dismissing my seemingly outrageous aspiration, he stood by me, offering his unwavering support. When I confessed to my mom my desire to quit my job and delve into investing, her response stung. You should have pursued what you love from the start, without fretting over your father. Despite the rawness of my father's passing, her words felt like a wake-up call. Previously consumed by the negatives, her smile ignited a newfound resolve within me, one that cared little for the opinions of others. Amidst the chaos of funerals, estate settlements, relocations, and a whirlwind of tasks, I embarked on my journey as an investor. It wasn't all smooth sailing from the get-go, but with the unwavering support of my calm and cheerful husband and my mother's encouraging presence, I pressed on. With a combination of my savings and my father's inheritance, my investments began to bear fruit. Over the years, my income soared far beyond what I earned at my previous job, leading to a deeply fulfilling life. Yet amidst this joy, two shadows loomed large: my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, constant sources of concern. My sister-in-law, 3 years senior to my husband and 4 to me, remains unmarried. Since David and I decided to tie the knot, her demeanor suggested she wasn't exactly thrilled. Even my mother-in-law seemed to view me as nothing more than a privileged daddy's girl, despite my equal footing in the workforce. Despite my father's CEO status, each visit to my in-laws was met with snide remarks. Being the coddled princess, I bet you're useless at housework. It's a woman's duty, you know. Spare David the trouble. Mother-in-law, my own mother taught me well, so I'm quite capable. Besides, with both of us working, David and I share responsibilities. It was his suggestion, actually. But my mother-in-law wouldn't hear of it. Even my sister-in-law couldn't contain her frustration in my presence, insisting it's absurd for a woman to marry yet make her husband do chores. After my father-in-law's passing, my relationship with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law took a nosedive. Must be nice, living off David's earnings and lazing about at home. I'm dealing with so much since my husband's gone. How come you get to live so carefree, Kathy? Mother-in-law, as I've explained before, I earn my keep as an investor. I'm far from idling. If you're truly struggling, I'd suggest finding a way to manage your own finances. Besides, having kids isn't the sole measure of a woman's worth. With my father-in-law's demise, my mother-in-law's fixation on money intensified. She seemed resentful of my perceived ease, despite my commitment to my work as an investor. Yet I wasn't inclined to hand over any cash. Every visit to the in-laws revealed more lavish purchases, making it clear where any allowance would end up. I loved David, a man of unwavering trust, and I chose to shield him from the truth about his family. There came a moment when I found solace in confiding in my own mother. Why can't I conceive? The weight of uncertainty as I approached 35, coupled with incessant inquiries from my mother-in-law about when will you start a family, became overwhelming. Her hurtful words labeling me as useless echoed in my mind, and I couldn't contain my frustration. So I poured out my heart to my mother, seeking understanding. Well, I had you when I was 35, so there's no need to worry. Timing is in God's hands, dear. He'll guide us when the time is right. Her comforting words lifted a burden from my soul. From then on, even amidst my mother-in-law's persistent mentions of children, I found reassurance. Children, after all, are a precious blessing. After enduring 5 tumultuous years, a sense of calm finally settled in. Then, unexpectedly, my world was rocked once more by the sudden passing of my mother. Struck by a subarachnoid hemorrhage, she, my guiding light, slipped away, leaving me engulfed in sorrow. David, my steadfast companion through years of shared life, seemed equally shaken. Despite his kindness and support, the funeral arrived before we could fully grasp the void left by my mother's absence. As mourners gathered to bid farewell to my mother, a former executive at the company my brother now led, among them stood my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. It appeared they had chosen a moment when David was absent. "No need for you to be here, Dolan," my mother-in-law remarked curtly, offering no condolences. They proceeded to sign the register, leaving me stunned by their callousness. Yet upon David's return, their demeanor shifted instantly. "You might be struggling, but Kathy's shock is likely even greater. You need to be there for her," they'd insist, seemingly mindful of my emotions. Later, as exhaustion from the whirlwind of recent days weighed heavily on me, the doorbell pierced the quiet of our home. My husband, ever considerate, answered it, assuming my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had come to offer support. Without a moment's hesitation, he ushered them inside. As they entered the living room, their glances towards me twisted into unpleasant smirks, and then came words I never expected. "From today onwards, this is our domain. Outsiders need to leave, Mom," David exclaimed, his surprise evident. My mother-in-law's words poured forth unabated. "Until now, we've tolerated your presence because your mom was here, but now, only jobless Kathy remains. If you let yourself be leached by such a woman, you'll ruin yourself. We'll move in with you, so you need to divorce Kathy." "Mom, what are you saying? Especially now, and what do you mean by jobless?" "I've explained countless times that Kathy is an investor. When you say investor, it sounds like she has a real job, but let's be honest, isn't she just dabbling in stocks? How can such a woman be a wife? You could do so much better." "Wait a second, what's all this about bad-mouthing Kathy? What exactly are you two insinuating? Kathy earns her own keep. Don't belittle her efforts. You're the ones being missiled. You've been under Kathy's mom's influence all this time. Haven't you been brainwashed?" "That's right. Kathy's turned out this way because her mom spoiled her. I can see why David defends her. It's her mom's fault for raising her like this." As my sister-in-law and mother-in-law continued their disparagement of my mom, my simmering anger finally boiled over. I could endure their insults directed at me, but I refused to tolerate any disrespect towards my mom. "Stop tarnishing the memory of my late mother," I seethed, glaring at them. Yet they both grinned smugly, showing no hint of remorse. Fine, we get it. You don't want us talking about your mom, huh? Now that the mom who always sided with you and allowed you to be a recluse is gone, it must be tough to face the truth." My fists clenched, trembling with suppressed rage. Taking a deep breath to rein in my emotions, I prepared to fire back, but before I could speak, it was David who stepped in. "That's enough, Mom. Stop speaking ill of Kathy," David interjected firmly, addressing both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. "Kathy isn't a recluse, she's a legitimate investor. My mother-in-law and I have been supporting Kathy's endeavors from the start. If Kathy were just fooling around, neither of us would have stood for it." Even my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and I couldn't conceal our surprise at David's uncharacteristically stern tone. My mother-in-law seemed taken aback, scrambling to offer excuses. "Don't be so upset. Nevertheless, Kathy's lifestyle thus far has been sustained by your income, hasn't it? You've provided her with a privileged life, even buying her this lavish condo." Poor David. If you move in with us, we'll take care of all the household chores. Just give us a small allowance. That's all we need. Isn't that right, Mom?" My mother-in-law's words were cut short by David's flustered voice. "This apartment belongs to Kathy." "What?" My mother-in-law's incredulous cry filled the room, her surprise impossible to conceal. She scrutinized David with wide eyes, as if seeking confirmation. "This apartment belongs to Kathy. When did this happen? I never agreed to that. This apartment was part of my father-in-law's legacy, and Kathy inherited it. That's why the title is in her name. Besides, we split the living expenses evenly. I don't understand what you're insinuating, but Kathy earns more than I do." Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were taken aback by David's revelation. It was understandable. They couldn't have fathomed that I earned more than him. My mother-in-law's energy waned at David's words, leaving her looking like a deflated balloon. Taking the reins from her, my sister-in-law spoke up. "That's impossible. Do investors really make that much? Just by trading stocks as an individual? I can't speak for other investors, but perhaps Kathy has a knack for it. Regardless, the facts remain. How dare you undermine my beloved wife? This is our home. Stop kidding around, both of you. Leave now." Upon hearing David's words, my sister-in-law spiraled into panic. "What? Hold on. We came here expecting to move in today." "What?" Now it was my turn, along with my husband, to exclaim in surprise. "You sold our house. Why the sudden decision? You could have at least discussed it with me." We thought we could stay here. And we were strapped for cash. I quit my job, assuming you'd support us. If you don't let us stay, we'll be in serious trouble. Mom, please say something." With pleading eyes fixed on David, my sister-in-law shook her mother, who seemed frozen in shock. But the magnitude of the situation left my mother-in-law in a daze. My sister-in-law, her confidence shattered, now clung to me for support. "Hey, Kathy, I'm sorry. Please talk to David for me. We can't go on like this. You mentioned you sold your house, so you must have some money saved up, right?" I spoke coolly to my clinging sister-in-law, prompting her to lash out at me. "Don't act clever. Just because your investments turned out well, don't think you're above everyone else. Know your place. Enough is enough." David's voice boomed, drowning out even my sister-in-law's protests. He fixed a piercing stare on her as she fell silent. "Forget about the house. I won't even demand my share. Just leave right now." With that, my husband practically escorted his mother and sister out, firmly locking the door behind them. For a while, we could hear the persistent ringing of the doorbell and pounding on the door, but eventually the noise faded into silence. After that ordeal, word from relatives had it that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had secured a modest apartment to rent and were now living together. Their old family home, nestled in a remote area, didn't fetch much on the market, given its location and the value of the land. My sister-in-law struggled to land a decent job, and their funds quickly dwindled. Despite their repeated attempts to rely on David and me, we firmly shut the door each time. They resorted to selling off their designer possessions and now reportedly scrape by with part-time jobs, working tirelessly from dawn till dusk. Meanwhile, I've enjoyed the freedom that comes with being an investor, no longer subjected to hurtful remarks. And as my late mother had foretold, we're preparing to welcome a new member into our family next year. Once again, I'm grateful for her timely blessings.
My name is Emily, a 25-year-old with a life many would envy. My career in marketing had taken off faster than I dared to dream, and I was surrounded by a group of friends who were more like family. But for all my success, my love life was a series of unremarkable dates and fleeting connections. That was until a regular evening turned into something out of a storybook. It was a casual dinner with friends at a new restaurant, Savory Secrets. The place had a buzz about it, a mix of modern chic and cozy comfort. I was there with Sarah, my college roommate turned confidant, and Mike, the friend who always had my back. We were celebrating my latest promotion, and I remember feeling a mix of pride and excitement. "Emily, you seriously need to take a break and enjoy yourself. You've earned it," Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. Mike chimed in. "Yeah, maybe you'll even meet someone interesting tonight. This place is swarming with potential." I laughed it off, focusing more on the intriguing menu. That's when Mark, the chef, approached our table. He was charismatic, with an easy smile and an apron that told stories of his culinary battles. "Evening, folks. I'm Mark, the head chef. I couldn't help but overhear it's a special occasion. Mind if I recommend something off-menu? It's a creation I'm particularly proud of." His confidence was intriguing. "Sure, why not? Surprise us," I replied, intrigued by this unexpected interaction. As Mark walked away, Sarah nudged me. "He's definitely interesting, right?" I brushed off her suggestion, focusing instead on the ambiance and the laughter of my friends. But I couldn't deny there was something about Mark that caught my attention. When the dishes arrived, they were a work of art. The flavors were complex and delightful, a perfect balance of innovation and comfort. Mark returned to check on us, and we struck up a conversation. He spoke about his journey as a chef, his dreams, and his passion for food. It was captivating to see someone so dedicated to their craft. "You really have a talent for this," I found myself saying. "This dish is amazing." Mark's eyes lit up with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. I hope I can cook for you again sometime." The night continued with more laughter and stories, but there was an undercurrent of something new and exciting. As we left the restaurant, Mark caught up with us at the door. "It was great meeting you all. Emily, I hope to see you back here soon. Maybe next time you can try another one of my special creations." His words lingered with me as we walked away. Sarah and Mike teased me about the obvious spark, but I brushed it off as just a pleasant encounter. Over the next few days, thoughts of Mark and his culinary magic kept drifting into my mind. There was an undeniable connection, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of curiosity, of wanting to know more about this person who had appeared so unexpectedly in my life. Returning to Savory Secrets became a new routine for me. Each visit was an opportunity to dive deeper into conversations with Mark. Our chats moved from culinary arts to dreams, aspirations, and shared laughs. It was refreshing, easy, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other outside the restaurant. One evening, as we walked through the city park, Mark turned to me and said, "You know, Emily, I've never met anyone who gets my jokes as much as you do." I laughed. "Well, I've never met anyone who can cook as well as you do. Guess we're even." Our dates were simple but special. We'd go for long walks, try out new cafes, or sometimes just sit and talk for hours. It felt like we'd known each other for years, not just weeks. One night, sitting on his couch, sharing stories of our childhood, Mark looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Emily, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm rushing things, but I feel something strong for you, something I haven't felt in a long time." His vulnerability struck a chord in me. "Mark, I feel the same way. It's like we found something rare and precious." The conversation that night was a turning point. We both acknowledged the deep connection we felt, and it wasn't long before we were talking about a future together. Things moved fast, and some of my friends, like Sarah, were cautious. "Emily, aren't you two moving too fast? I mean, it's great, but it's only been a couple of months," Sarah expressed her concern one day over coffee. "I know it seems quick, Sarah, but with Mark, it just feels right. I can't explain it," I replied, trying to convey the certainty I felt in my heart. Mark's passion wasn't just limited to his work. He was equally passionate about our relationship. He'd surprise me with little notes, impromptu dates, and always made sure to listen and understand me. It was a level of attention and care I hadn't experienced before. One evening, while we were having dinner at my place, Mark brought up the topic of marriage. "Emily, I've been thinking, what we have is unique. I don't want to wait to start our life together. How would you feel about getting married?" I remember feeling a rush of emotions, excitement, joy, a little bit of fear, but above all, a deep sense of connection. "Mark, I would love that. There's nothing I want more than to be with you." Our engagement was a whirlwind. We planned a small, intimate wedding, just close friends and family. The day was perfect, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future together. Looking back, those months were a blur of happiness. I had found someone who understood me, who shared my passions, and who made every day brighter. It was a romance out of a fairy tale, and I was fully immersed in the magic of it all. Our first year of marriage, a blend of joy and adjustments, was unfolding in ways I hadn't anticipated. The home I had always known took on new life with Mark's presence. Our routines intermingled, my early morning jogs followed by his meticulously crafted breakfasts, the quick kisses before rushing to our respective jobs, and the quiet evenings when we both managed to be home together. But beneath the surface of our domestic bliss, a current of tension was slowly rising. Mark's commitment to his work was admirable, yet it began to take a toll on our time together. His hours at the restaurant extended late into the night, leaving me in a quiet house, thoughts wandering to the growing distance between us. One night, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, I decided to voice my concerns. "Mark, I love that you're so passionate about your work, but these long hours? I miss you. Is there any way you can cut back a bit?" He looked at me, his face etched with a mix of concern and an unspoken pressure. "Emily, you know I'm doing this for us. I need to match your success, to contribute equally. I don't want you to feel like you're carrying the burden alone." "It's not about the money, Mark. I just wish we had more time together," I replied, the words tinged with a longing for our earlier days. The conversation ended on a note of mutual understanding, but the issue remained unresolved, hanging in the air like an unsaid promise. It was amidst this delicate balance of work and home life that Mark approached me with a request, his voice laced with hesitancy. "Emily, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's my mom. She's having a tough time financially, and I was thinking maybe we could help her out, like $1,000 a month?" I paused, taking in the weight of his request. His mother, a sweet woman who had welcomed me with open arms, was now in need. "Of course we can help, Mark," I said, my decision firm. "She's family, and it's important to support each other." Mark's relief was evident. "Thank you, Emily. This means a lot to me, and I know it will to her as well." So, we started a new routine. Each month, I would give Mark the money, and he would send it to his mother. I didn't control this process because I trusted him completely. It was a decision made from compassion, a gesture to support someone we both cared about. Yet, even as we settled into this new arrangement, the earlier issue of Mark's work hours remained a gentle undercurrent in our daily life. He worked too much, stayed in the restaurant for a long time, and often did not answer the phone. The routine of our married life continued, with me diligently transferring money each month for Mark's mother, and Mark immersing himself ever deeper into his work at the restaurant. Despite the semblance of normalcy, an undercurrent of loneliness persisted in the wake of his prolonged absences. I kept myself busy, focusing on my career, but the solitude in our home was palpable. It was during one of these routine evenings that a call from Lily, a friend living on the other side of town, stirred a whirlpool of doubts in my mind. "Emily, I've seen Mark around here quite often. He's always going to the same house with large packages in hand. It's been happening for a while now." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Are you sure it's Mark?" "Yes, I'm certain. It's just odd, don't you think?" Lily's voice was laced with concern. That night, I confronted Mark. His arrival home was met with my anxious query. "Mark, Lily says she's seen you frequently at a house on the west side. What are you doing there?" For a moment, there was a flicker of alarm in Mark's eyes. "Oh, that! It's nothing to worry about. Our restaurant has taken on a community project. We're helping out some elderly and needy people in that area with food and necessities." His explanation seemed plausible, yet something in the back of my mind nagged at me. "But why didn't you tell me about this project?" "It didn't seem important. It's just part of the job," he replied casually, but I could sense a hint of discomfort. Wanting to believe him, yet unable to shake off my doubts, I pressed further. "Can you show me something about this project? It just seems a bit unusual." Mark paused for a moment, then took out his phone. He scrolled through his photos and showed me a picture of himself standing next to an elderly man, both smiling at the camera. "See, this is Mr. Thompson, one of the people we're helping." The photo did bring some reassurance, but the seeds of doubt had already been sown. The smile on Mark's face in the picture seemed genuine, and the elderly man looked like someone who could use the help. Yet, why did I feel like something was still amiss? That night, as I lay in bed, Mark's regular breathing beside me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering suspicion. The photograph had partly allayed my fears, but Lily's words echoed in my mind, and a small part of me still questioned the truth of Mark's explanation. The days following the conversation about the charity work and the photograph Mark showed me slipped by in a haze of half-hearted reassurance. I wanted to believe Mark, to trust in the life we had built together, but the seeds of doubt, once planted, refused to wither away. My uneasy peace was shattered one afternoon by an unexpected delivery. A courier van stopped in front of our house, and a young man rang the doorbell, a large box in his arms. "Package for you," he said, handing me a clipboard. Confused, I looked at the box and then at the delivery note. "There must be some mistake. We didn't order this." He checked the address and the name on the note. "It's all here, correct address, signed off by a Mark. It's baby supplies, diapers, baby food." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Baby supplies?" "Yeah. You sure they're not yours?" he asked, a puzzled look crossing his face. "No, they're not," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The courier scratched his head. "Well, maybe your husband ordered them for someone else. He orders similar stuff to another address quite often." His words struck me like a lightning bolt. Another address? The same one Lily had mentioned seeing Mark go to with packages? I handed the box back to the courier. "There's been a mix-up. These aren't for us." The courier seemed to sense my distress. "Maybe your husband just got the addresses mixed up." Happens sometimes. As he drove away, I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. The coincidence was too glaring, the implications too stark to ignore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Determined, I went inside, grabbed my keys, and headed straight to my car. The address, the same one Lily had seen Mark visiting, was now my destination. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, each turn bringing me closer to a truth I both dreaded and needed to confront. The drive felt surreal, as if I were moving through a fog of disbelief. How could my life, which seemed so perfect, unravel so quickly? What was waiting for me at that address? I tried to brace myself for what I might find, but deep down, I knew nothing could prepare me for the reality of betrayal. As I neared the address, my heart pounded in my chest. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The house in front of me looked ordinary, yet it held the key to the secrets Mark had been keeping. Standing at the doorstep of the unknown, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The door opened, and a young woman appeared, her eyes curious and a little cautious. She was holding a toddler, no more than a year old. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at me with a puzzled expression. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking for Mark. Is he here?" Her eyebrows knitted in confusion. "Mark? Yes, he's here. Who are you?" Before I could answer, Mark appeared behind her. The look on his face when he saw me was a mix of shock and fear. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I could barely find my words. The sight of him in this setting felt like a punch to the gut. "I could ask you the same, Mark. "What's going on? Who is this woman? And why are you here?" The woman looked from me to Mark, a growing sense of realization dawning on her face. "Mark, who is she?" Mark's voice was shaky. "This is Emily, my wife." The word wife hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. The woman's face turned pale, and she stepped back, her gaze fixed on Mark. "Your wife. You told me you were divorced." I felt the ground beneath me shift. Divorced? Mark, what is she talking about? Mark's eyes darted between me and the woman, his usual composure crumbling. "Emily, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Explain? How can you explain this?" The toddler in the woman's arms began to fuss, sensing the tension. She looked at Mark with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You need to leave, Mark. Now." Mark hesitated, his gaze lingering on the child, then turned to me. "Emily, please, let me explain. This is all a big misunderstanding." But the pieces had already fallen into place. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the baby supplies. It was all clear now. Mark had a life here, a life I knew nothing about. "Save it, Mark. There's nothing you can say," I said, my voice breaking. I turned and walked away, the sound of the closing door marking the end of the life I thought I had with Mark. The drive back home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of Mark's betrayal sank in. He had been living a double life, and I had been oblivious, trusting him while he lied to me every day. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. The life I had built with Mark, the dreams we shared, everything felt tainted. I sat there, alone, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just discovered. The future I had envisioned with Mark was gone, replaced by a painful uncertainty and a deep sense of betrayal. The days following the revelation felt like walking through a fog. I moved through the motions of my daily life, but everything seemed dull and distant. The pain of Mark's betrayal was a constant ache, a reminder of the trust I had placed in him and how it had been shattered. Mark tried to reach out, his messages and calls filling up my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed space, time to think and to heal. The idea of facing him, of hearing his explanations, was more than I could bear. A few days later, I sat down with Sarah, my closest friend. Over cups of coffee in my now too quiet kitchen, I poured out the whole story. She listened, her face a mixture of anger and sympathy. "I can't believe he would do this to you, Emily. You deserve so much better," Sarah said, her hand reaching out to cover mine. "I just don't understand how I missed it. The signs were all there," I replied, the weight of my naivety heavy on my shoulders. "It's not your fault, Em. He lied to you. You trusted your husband, which is what anyone would do," she reassured me. Sarah's words were a small comfort, but the wound was still fresh. I knew I had to make a decision about my future, about my marriage. With Sarah's encouragement, I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. The lawyer was sympathetic but professional, outlining the steps for a divorce and what I could expect in terms of legal proceedings. "I want compensation for this betrayal," I said, a newfound determination in my voice. "We'll do everything we can to ensure a fair outcome," the lawyer assured me. The process was draining, both emotionally and legally. Mark's attempts to explain and reconcile turned into pleas for forgiveness as the reality of the divorce proceedings set in. But for me, the trust was broken beyond repair. In the midst of the legal battle, I also had to confront the financial deceit. The money I had given him under the pretense of helping his mother, it was meant for his second family. I supported his mistress and child. Unraveling our joint finances and reclaiming what was rightfully mine became another battleground. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I leaned heavily on my friends and family for support. They were my rock, providing comfort and strength when I felt overwhelmed by the chaos that my life had become. Finally, The day came when the divorce was finalized. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of a chapter in my life that had started with so much promise, but ended in deception. Standing in the now empty house, I realized that this was not just an end, but also a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to find myself again after being lost in the shadow of a relationship built on lies. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. With the support of my loved ones and the lessons I had learned, I knew I could move forward, stronger and wiser. I'm Anna, and this story isn't just mine. It's about the life I shared with Michael, my husband, and how everything we built together slowly unraveled. We met in college, two dreamers with ambitions as high as the stars. Michael was the kind of guy who could light up a room with his laugh, simple yet charming, always with a kind word for everyone. We fell in love, graduated, and, as luck would have it, started our careers at the same company. Life was good, simple, and blissfully happy. Our evenings were the highlight of my days. We'd come home, cook together, and share stories about our work. Michael was a good listener, always interested in my day, my ideas. He was supportive, proud of our equal standing at work, our shared ambitions. "Anna, you're amazing at what you do," he'd say with a smile. "I love that we're in this together." But then, everything changed when Michael got promoted. It was a significant achievement, and initially, I was overjoyed. But with the promotion came a change I hadn't anticipated. Michael started to care more about appearances, about status. He wasn't the same man I'd fallen in love with. Slowly, his criticism began. First, it was subtle, a comment here or there. "Why do we always eat the same meals? We can afford better now," he'd remark, pushing his plate away. I tried to adapt, to please him, but nothing seemed good enough. He began to critique my clothing, my shopping choices, even how I decorated our home. "Why do you always buy the cheapest brands? We're not college students anymore, Anna," he'd say, his voice laced with annoyance. I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. The man I loved, who once found joy in our simple life, was now obsessed with wealth and status. One evening, after I returned from grocery shopping with more budget-friendly items, Michael's frustration boiled over. "Anna, this isn't acceptable. You're still dressing and shopping like we're on a tight budget. You don't match my status," he said coldly, his words cutting through me like a knife. His words lingered in the air, marking the end of our simple, happy days. That was the moment I realized how much he had changed, how much our life had diverged from the path we once walked together. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey I never expected to take. As days turned into weeks, the strain in our relationship only deepened. Michael's constant critiques about how I didn't match his status weighed heavily on me. I missed the man he used to be, the one who found joy in our simple life together. But as his obsession with wealth and appearances grew, our connection continued to fade. In the midst of this growing distance, life threw us a curveball. I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a mix of emotions, joy, fear, and a glimmer of hope that this might bring us back together. Michael's reaction to the pregnancy was surprisingly warm. His face, which had been etched with dissatisfaction for so long, lit up when I told him. "Really? We're going to have a baby?" he exclaimed, his voice filled with an excitement I hadn't heard in ages. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of the old Michael. During my pregnancy, he was attentive and caring, often checking in on me and ensuring I was comfortable. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a brief return to the days when we were a team. When our son, David, was born, Michael's joy was palpable. Holding David for the first time, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect, Anna. We made this beautiful boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The early days with David were a blur of sleepless nights and new routines, but they were also filled with moments of tenderness and joy. Michael, despite his busy schedule, tried to be there for David's first milestones. Watching him with our son, I saw glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with. With David's arrival, our relationship found a temporary peace. The arguments and criticisms subsided, replaced by shared moments of wonder over our son. It was as if David's presence healed some of the fractures in our marriage. I cherished this period, hoping it would last, that maybe this was the turning point we needed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a brief respite, a calm before another storm. For now, though, I held on to the hope that our family could find its way back to the happiness we once knew. Life with a newborn was a whirlwind, and for a while, it seemed to bridge the gap between Michael and me. But as David grew and the novelty of new fatherhood faded for Michael, the old patterns began to resurface. Michael's work consumed him more than ever, and when he was home, his attention was more focused on showing off David than actually bonding with him. He would buy our son the most expensive toys and clothes, things a toddler would never appreciate. One evening, I found Michael online, browsing through a list of elite preschools. He didn't even look up as I entered the room. "Anna, I'm thinking of enrolling David in St. James Academy. It's the best in the city," he said, not asking but telling. I sat beside him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Michael, he's just 2. Do we really need to send him to such an expensive school?" He finally looked at me, his expression one of disbelief. "Of course, we do. He's my son. He deserves the best." "But he needs time to be a kid, Michael. Love and attention, not just the most expensive things," I argued, feeling a familiar frustration. Michael shook his head, dismissing my concerns. "You don't understand, Anna. It's about giving him opportunities I never had." This was our new normal. Conversations turned into debates, and debates into arguments. It felt like we were speaking different languages. I longed for the days when our dreams and values aligned. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it became physical. Michael often returned late from work, long after David and I had dinner. One night, when he came home at an ungodly hour, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "Michael, it's past midnight. You missed dinner again? David asked about you," I said, my voice laced with exhaustion. He shrugged off his coat, weary yet indifferent. "I'm the head of the department now, Anna. These late nights are just part of the job." "But what about us, Michael? What about your family?" I pleaded, hoping to reach some part of the man I married. He paused, his face a mix of fatigue and annoyance. "I'm doing all this for our family, Anna. You and David are living comfortably because of my hard work." I wanted to argue, to tell him that comfort wasn't just about money, but I was too tired. It was the same argument, and I knew I couldn't change his mind. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint clicks of his laptop from the other room, I realized that our little family was drifting apart. My husband, once my partner in every aspect of life, was now a stranger living under the same roof, connected only by a shared past and a son who deserved better than this growing void between his parents. It was during one of those long, silent evenings that I made a decision. I needed to go back to work, to find a piece of the woman I used to be before the distance with Michael grew too vast. The perfect opportunity came when a position opened up at my old company, the same place where Michael and I had started our journey together. Feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement, I decided to broach the subject with Michael. "Michael, I've been thinking of going back to work. There's an opening in my old department," I said, hoping for his support. His reaction was immediate and strong. "Go back to work? Why would you need to do that? I'm making more than enough for both of us," he replied, barely looking up from his laptop. I tried to explain. "It's not about the money, Michael. It's about me, about feeling like I'm contributing, being part of a team again. Michael finally looked at me, his expression one of disapproval. "You can contribute by taking care of David and the house. That's your team now." I couldn't hide my frustration. "But I need more than that. I want to use my skills, feel professional achievement again. Besides, it's good for David to see both his parents working." Michael stood up, his voice rising. "You going back to work, especially at my company, is not a good idea. What will people think? That I can't provide for my family?" I was taken aback by his attitude. "So this is about your image, your status?" He ignored my question and continued. "Look at yourself, Anna. You've changed. You've let yourself go since having David." His words were like a slap in the face. I felt my cheeks burning with a mix of anger and hurt. "What do you mean, I've let myself go?" "You know what I mean. You've gained weight. You hardly take care of yourself. It's not a good look, especially not for the wife of a department head," he said, his tone cold and detached. I was speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. The man who once loved me for who I was now stood there, criticizing my appearance, my worth. "And frankly," he added, his words cutting deeper, "I would be embarrassed to have you working at the company looking like this. I will be ashamed at work for such an ugly wife." I stood there, frozen, as he walked out of the room. His words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how far we had drifted apart. That night, I lay awake, Michael's words replaying over and over. It was clear now. The man I married, the man I loved, was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The days following Michael's harsh critique were some of the loneliest I had ever experienced. His words had cut deep, leaving me to question not just our relationship, but my self-worth. In the midst of this turmoil, an unexpected incident occurred that changed everything. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large, extravagant bouquet of flowers. Confused, I accepted the bouquet and the accompanying card, thinking maybe Michael was attempting an awkward apology. But as I opened the card, my heart sank. The words were like a punch to the gut. "To the most beautiful and perfect woman in the world, with the most charming youth and slender waist, which can be embraced with 2 hands." The words mocked me, a stark contrast to what Michael had said just days before. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation wash over me. This wasn't for me. It couldn't be. It was then I noticed the mistake in the address. The bouquet was meant for someone else. As I stood there trying to process this, my phone rang. It was Michael's new secretary, a young girl who had just started working for him. Michael had mentioned her once, laughing about how she was still studying and often mixed things up. "Mrs. Smith, I'm so sorry. I think I've made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice anxious. "What mistake?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "The flowers. They were meant for someone else." "I'm so sorry. I sent them to the wrong address," she admitted, sounding flustered. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Who were they meant for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The secretary hesitated. I don't know her name. I'm just asked to send flowers and gifts sometimes. Please don't tell Mr. Smith I called." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room, the unfaithful bouquet mocking me from the table. The realization of Michael's betrayal hit me hard. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Without a second thought, I packed a bag for myself and David. I grabbed some of his favorite toys, his clothes, and the essentials. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer, surrounded by the life I thought we had, which now felt like a lie. I left a note for Michael on the kitchen counter. I didn't wait for him to come home to offer excuses or explanations. I took David, who was confused but excited for an impromptu visit to Auntie's house, and left. Driving to my sister's place, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartache. The life I had known was crumbling, but I knew I needed to get away, to find some space to think and to protect David from the fallout. That evening, as I sat in my sister's living room, lost in thought, Michael showed up unexpectedly. He looked frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed self. "Anna, why did you leave? Why did you take David?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and anger. I confronted him directly. "Why? Maybe because of the bouquet sent to your mistress, mistakenly delivered to your wife," I said, my voice steady but filled with hurt. Michael's face fell. That was a misunderstanding. The secretary, she made a mistake. I swear, there's nothing going on." I looked at him, trying to find a hint of the truth in his eyes, but all I saw was desperation. "A mistake? Is that your best explanation?" Before he could respond, I pulled out a packet of photos and laid them on the table. "Then how do you explain these, Michael?" His eyes widened as he looked at the photos of him with a young woman, clearly more than just colleagues. Where did you get these?" he stammered. "I hired a private detective. He's been very thorough. Did you know she's the wife of your business partner?" I asked, watching as the color drained from his face. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "You can't let these get out. It'll ruin everything," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a bitter laugh escape me. "Ruin everything? What about us, Michael? What about our family?" He reached out, but I pulled away. "Anna, please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. I can fix this." But it was too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. "Forgive you? After you've lied and cheated?" "I can't, Michael, I won't. I'm filing for divorce. And these photos, they'll ensure I get what David and I deserve." Michael looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as the reality of the situation hit him. "Anna, please." But I had made up my mind. "No, Michael, you've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As he left, I knew that this was the end of our marriage. The evidence in my hands was more than just proof of his infidelity. It was the key to a new beginning for me and David. The road ahead would be hard, but I was determined to rebuild our lives, free from lies and betrayal. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings and tough decisions. I had initiated the divorce proceedings, armed with the evidence of Michael's infidelity. Despite the turmoil, there was a sense of determination within me. I was fighting not just for my own dignity, but for a better future for David. One afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss the details of the divorce. "We have a strong case, Anna. The evidence you provided is more than enough to ensure a favorable outcome for you and David," she said, her voice confident. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I just want this to be over. I want to ensure that David is taken care of." My lawyer assured me, "We'll make sure of that. You'll have custody, and with Michael's position, child support won't be an issue." As the days passed, the reality of my new life began to set in. I was going to be a single mother, a role I never anticipated. But I also felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was making decisions, standing up for myself and my son. The final hearing was a tense affair. Michael and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, the air thick with unspoken words. When the judge granted the divorce, citing Michael's infidelity, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was officially free from a marriage that had become a source of pain and betrayal. Outside the courtroom, Mikhail approached me. "Anna, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this," he said, his voice laced with defeat. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger. "It didn't have to be this way, Michael, but you made your choices." He nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I just hope one day you can forgive me, for David's sake." I took a deep breath. "I'll always do what's best for David. But as for us, there's nothing left to say." Walking away from the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure. The divorce was not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of a new chapter. I had stood up for myself, fought for what was right, and in the end, I had come out stronger. The finalization of the divorce marked the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a time of rebuilding, not just for me, but for David as well. We had both been through so much, and now it was time to look forward to a future that was ours to shape. One sunny afternoon, as David played in my sister's backyard, I sat with her on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. "You know, I never thought I'd be here, starting over like this," I said, watching David chase butterflies. My sister, always my rock, smiled at me. "But you're not just starting over, Anna. You're starting fresh. There's a difference. You're stronger now, more aware of what you want and don't want." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yeah, I guess you're right. It's all so overwhelming at times." She reached over, squeezing my hand. "It's going to be okay. You've got this, and you've got us, always." I smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the days turned into weeks, I began to find my footing again. I returned to work, where I was greeted with warmth and understanding. It felt good to be back, to be productive, and to engage with colleagues who respected and valued me. David, too, was adjusting. He missed his father, but we made sure he had regular visits. I wanted to ensure that, despite everything, he had a relationship with Michael. After all, whatever had happened between Michael and me, he was still David's dad. One evening, as I tucked David into bed, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft. I kissed his forehead, feeling a surge of love for my little boy. "Yes, David, I am. And I want you to always be happy too." He smiled, a sleepy, content smile. "I am, Mommy. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." "More than anything," I whispered, turning off his light. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I had been on. I thought about the future, uncertain but promising. I had dreams to chase, a career to build, and a beautiful son to raise. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I was ready to face it head on. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just a new beginning. It was a chance to write my own story, on my own terms. And with that thought, I welcomed the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, ready to embrace them with an open heart and a newfound strength. Hi, I'm Laura. If you peeked into my life, you'd probably find me buried in code, working remotely from my cozy little apartment. It's just me, my laptop, and the comforting hum of my routine. I'm not one for crowds or big social scenes. But Anna, my best and only friend since college, she's the complete opposite. She's this whirlwind of energy, always surrounded by friends, and happily married to Tom, who's as chatty and friendly as they come. Every time we meet, Anna has this thing about pushing me to date. "Laura, you're not getting any younger," she'd say in her half-joking, half-serious tone. "You need someone in your life other than your computer." I'd usually brush it off with a laugh, not really taking her seriously. But one evening, as we were lounging at her place, she was more persistent than usual. "I've got the perfect guy for you," she announced, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "His name's Chris, a family friend. You two would be great together." I remember twirling my spoon in my coffee, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Blind dates aren't really my style, Anna. They're always so awkward," I protested. Anna leaned in, her smile persuasive. "It's not a blind date, silly. We'll have dinner here, just the four of us. It'll be casual, no pressure." So, there I was, giving in to her plan. The night I met Chris at Anna's place, my stomach was a knot of nerves. But Chris, he was surprisingly easy to talk to. Kind of reserved, but with a genuine smile that made me feel more at ease. We all chatted in Anna's living room, the conversation flowing smoothly until Tom, out of the blue, brought up their struggles with fertility. "We're trying for a baby, but it's been hard," he said, and I could see the hope mixed with worry in his eyes. I nodded, feeling a bit out of my depth with such a personal topic. "I hope it works out for you guys," I said, and meant it. After that night, Chris and I started seeing each other. It wasn't like those dramatic love stories you read about. It was more comfortable. He was a good listener, and we shared a lot of the same interests. Before I even knew how it happened, we were dating. I remember thinking, as I fell asleep one night after one of our dates, that having someone else around isn't so bad. Not so bad at all. 6 months had flown by, and there I was, in a simple yet elegant white dress, saying, "I do" to Chris. It felt surreal, standing there with him, Anna intently watching us, her belly now showing a growing life inside. Tom was beaming, taking photos like a man on a mission. The first months of our marriage felt like living in a dream. Chris was everything I'd hoped for in a partner, attentive, caring, always making me laugh with his subtle humor. We'd have these quiet evenings, just the two of us, and I cherished every moment. But as time passed, I noticed changes. Small at first, like Chris coming home late more often. "Work's been crazy," he'd say, kissing me on the forehead before heading to the shower. One evening, while Chris was working late again, I called Anna. "Hey, it's me. Chris has been really busy with work lately. Is this normal after getting married?" Anna's voice crackled through the phone. "Totally normal, Laura. Tom was like that too. Men in their work, you know?" I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Chris was home less and less, and when he was, there was this distance, like he was there but not really with me. We stopped having those quiet evenings. It was like living with a ghost. One night when he came home late again, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Chris, we need to talk. You've been so distant lately. Is everything okay?" He just shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "It's just work, Laura. You wouldn't understand. It's really busy right now." I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to be like. The silence in the house felt heavy, suffocating. I missed our talks, our laughs, the way he used to look at me. The next morning, I called Anna, hoping for some reassurance. "Anna, I don't know what to do. It's like Chris is a different person." "Laura, give it time. He's just adjusting to married life. It's a phase. It'll pass," Anna said. But her words didn't comfort me like they used to. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Was this just a phase, or was I losing the man I married? The uncertainty was the hardest part, like walking in the dark, not knowing where the path was leading. The more Chris stayed out late, the more the silence in our house seemed to echo with unanswered questions. "Working late again," he'd say, his excuses sounding more and more like a rehearsed script. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the unease growing inside me like a thorny vine. Desperate for some advice, I called Anna. I could hear the faint cries of her baby in the background. "Anna, I'm worried about Chris. He's always out late. It doesn't feel right," I said, my voice tinged with concern. Anna's response was quick, almost dismissive. "Oh, Laura, you're just being paranoid. I'm too busy with the baby to think about such things. Tom was the same when we first got married. It's normal," she said, the sound of her baby feeding interrupting our conversation. Her words did little to soothe me. If anything, they made me feel more alone, my concerns brushed off as mere paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, I decided to take a drastic step. Using my programming skills, I put together a small spyware program. I knew it was a violation of trust, but the need for truth overpowered my guilt. I installed it on Chris's phone, telling myself it was just to put my mind at ease. The first time I logged into the program, my heart pounded in my chest. The screen showed a map with Chris's location, a hotel in the city, nowhere near his office. As the days passed, the pattern became clear. Different hotels, always in the evenings. My stomach churned with each new revelation, but nothing prepared me for what I found next. The program allowed me to see his messages. I hesitated, knowing this was crossing a line, but I had to know. The chat window opened, and there it was, a stream of messages between Chris and someone else. Not just anyone, but Anna, my best friend. Their words were intimate, a stark contrast to the distant, almost formal way he spoke to me. I sat there, my whole body numb, as I read their plans, their laughter at my expense, the betrayal laid bare in pixels on my screen. The truth about my husband and my best friend, the two people I trusted most, was right in front of me, and it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Chris married me in order to provide an alibi for himself. Now he can be near his mistress more often, hiding behind the fact that he is married to me. Unbelievable. We often don't see what's happening right under our noses, blinded by trust or maybe a refusal to acknowledge the possibility of betrayal. But there it was, in black and white. My world, as I knew it, had just crumbled. The nights became longer, each one stretching out like a dark, endless road as I sat alone, staring at my computer screen. The glow illuminated pages of messages between Chris and Anna, a window into a betrayal so deep it felt like drowning. Each message I read twisted the knife a little deeper. Chris's words about me were cruel and mocking. "Laura's so clueless. It's almost funny," he wrote in one message. And Anna, she laughed along, adding her own jabs. "Yeah, she's weirdly naive. It's like playing a game with a child." Their laughter at our expense wasn't the worst of it, though. They planned their secret rendezvous with a casualness that made my stomach churn. "How about the Hilton this Thursday?" Chris would suggest. "Perfect, can't wait," Anna would reply, as if they were planning a simple coffee meeting. But one message stopped me cold, a revelation that felt like a physical blow. It was Anna talking about her newborn, Tom's supposed child. "The best part is Tom thinks he's the father," she wrote with a twisted pride. Chris's reply was a heartless confirmation. "Our little secret. He's none the wiser." It wasn't just an affair. It was a double betrayal, the depth of which was unimaginable. The evidence of their deceit wasn't just in the messages on my screen. It was lying in a crib, gurgling and cooing, oblivious to the web of lies surrounding its existence. I sat there, numb, the reality sinking in. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, was not only unfaithful, but a father to my best friend's child. And Anna, the friend I had trusted with my deepest fears and happiest moments, was a willing participant in this cruel game. As the night wore on, the silence of the house enveloped me. It was no longer a home, but a stage for a tragedy I never saw coming. The betrayal was not just of the heart. It was a betrayal of every moment we had shared, every laugh, every secret. And at the center of it all was a child, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of selfish desires. I realized then that the most profound wounds are often inflicted by those closest to us. And the evidence of this betrayal was now lying innocently in a crib, a living reminder of the lies and deceit that had shattered my world. The morning after I discovered the truth about Chris and Anna, I felt like I was in a daze. My apartment, once a haven, now felt like a cage trapping me with my betrayal. I knew what I had to do. Tom deserved to know the truth as much as I did. I picked up my phone, my heart pounding. Dialing Tom's number felt like stepping off a cliff. "Tom, it's Laura. We need to talk. It's about Anna and Chris." Tom's usually cheerful voice was laced with concern. "Laura, what's going on? You sound serious." I took a deep breath, my voice shaky. "It's bad, Tom. Can we meet somewhere private? There's something you need to see." We met at a quiet cafe, away from the places where our lives had crossed. Tom looked anxious as he sat down. "Okay, Laura, what's this all about? You're scaring me." I pushed the printouts of the messages across the table to him. "Tom, I'm sorry to drop this on you, but Chris and Anna, they've been having an affair." Tom's face went pale as he read the messages. His usual jovial demeanor vanished, replaced by a mix of anger and disbelief. This is bullshit. Anna wouldn't. And Chris? His voice was a mix of rage and pain. "There's more," I said, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. "The baby. Chris might be the father." Tom looked like he had been slapped. He slammed his hand on the table, drawing stares. "That son of a... How could they do this? My own wife? My baby?" I could see the hurt in his eyes, raw and unfiltered. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I thought you should know. You deserved the truth." Tom ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and disbelief. "I can't believe I've been such a fool. We need to do something, Laura. We can't let them get away with this." His words echoed my own thoughts. "I agree. We need a plan. They've been playing us for fools, and it's time they faced the consequences." As we talked, our plan began to take shape. It wasn't just about confronting them. It was about exposing their lies, making them feel a fraction of the pain they'd caused us. We left the cafe with a sense of purpose, a bond formed through shared betrayal. As I drove home, the reality of what I was about to do settled in. This wasn't just about confronting a cheating spouse. It was about revenge. And my revenge would be cold, much colder than an iceberg. The day of the confrontation felt like walking into a storm. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I drove to Anna's house with Chris. He was clueless, humming along to the radio, while my hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. We walked into Anna's house, where Tom was already waiting. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were like flint. Anna greeted us, all smiles, unaware of the storm about to break. "Hey, everyone. So glad you could make it," Anna chirped, her voice grating on my nerves. Tom cut right to the chase. "I have something to share. A surprise." Anna's smile faltered. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" Tom pulled out an envelope. "It's a DNA test. It says, 'I'm not the father of your baby, Anna.'" Anna's face drained of color. "What? Tom, why would you? That's ridiculous." Chris turned to me, confusion written all over his face. "Laura, what's going on?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady. "Why don't you tell us, Chris, about you and Anna?" Anna's eyes darted between me and Tom, panic rising. "Laura, I don't know what you're talking about." Tom slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "Cut the crap, Anna. We know about the affair. We have the proof." Chris's face went from confused to pale. "Laura, it's not what you think." I threw the printouts of their messages on the table. "It's exactly what I think. How long, Chris? How long have you been lying to me?" Anna started to cry, her sobs dramatic. "It was a mistake. I'm so sorry." Tom's voice was like ice. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Anna. You've ruined everything." The room was thick with tension, a tangle of lies and betrayal finally laid bare. Chris tried to reach out to me, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me. You've betrayed me in the worst way." Anna was pleading now, looking at Tom. "Please, Tom. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Tom was unmoved. "Meaning doesn't change facts, Anna. It's over." I looked at Chris, my voice cold. "We're done, Chris. I want a divorce." The confrontation was brutal, the air heavy with the weight of broken trust and shattered relationships. As I walked out of Anna's house, I knew there was no going back. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the end of the life I thought I knew. After the confrontation, the drive home was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness. It wasn't just the affair. It was the depth of the deceit that cut the deepest. The next day, I called Chris, needing to hear him say it. "Chris, we need to talk. You owe me that much." He agreed to meet, his voice resigned. We sat across from each other at our kitchen table, a battlefield of broken vows. "Start talking, Chris. I want to hear you say it," I demanded, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Chris looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "It started as just a fling. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "A fling? You call destroying our marriage a fling?" My voice rose, tinged with anger and hurt. "I'm sorry, Laura. I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry doesn't undo the lies, Chris. It doesn't change anything," I snapped back. There was a pause, heavy with unsaid words. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I want a divorce, and I'll be talking to a lawyer about compensation for this betrayal," I said, my resolve firm. Chris nodded, defeated. "I understand. I'll cooperate." The conversation with Anna was even harder. I called her, my former best friend, now the source of my deepest pain. "Anna, we need to talk," I said as soon as she picked up. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Anna's voice was shaky, filled with false remorse. "Save it, Anna. How could you do this to me? To Tom? To your own family?" I asked, my voice hard. "I was selfish. I made a terrible mistake," she admitted. "A mistake? You made a choice, Anna. And now you have to live with the consequences," I replied coldly. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right," she said, but her words felt empty. "It's too late for that. Tom knows everything. You've lost him, and you've lost me," I said, hanging up before she could respond. The aftermath was messy. Lawyers were involved, divorce papers were filed, and settlements discussed. But through it all, I held my head high. I was hurt, yes, but not broken. I realized that sometimes the hardest betrayals come from those we trust the most. But they also teach us the most valuable lessons about strength and self-respect. As the chapter of my life with Chris and Anna closed, I knew that I was walking away with something invaluable, my dignity and the knowledge that I was stronger than I ever knew. The day I signed the final divorce papers, it felt like I was signing off on the most painful chapter of my life. In the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. "You're doing great, Laura. Most wouldn't have handled it as well as you have," my lawyer said, offering a sympathetic smile as he handed me the documents. "Yeah, well, when life kicks you down, you kick back harder," I replied, trying to sound tougher than I felt. Leaving the office, the reality of my new life hit me. I was no longer part of a we, but just me, Laura, on my own. It was scary, but also a chance for a fresh start. I met with Tom a few days later. We were like comrades who had survived the same war. "How's life treating you, Tom?" I asked as we grabbed coffee. Tom sighed, stirring his cup. "It's rough, Laura. Every day's a challenge. But like you said, we kick back harder, right?" "Right. We rebuild, stronger and wiser," I said, feeling a sense of solidarity. We chatted more about moving forward, about not letting our past define us. It was a conversation tinged with sadness, but also hope. Driving home, I thought about Chris and Anna. Last I heard, they were together, but far from happy. Anna, used to a life of luxury, was now stuck in a cramped apartment, constantly at Chris's throat for the financial mess they were in. A neighbor told me how they were always fighting, their arguments loud enough for the whole block to hear. "Police were there just last week," she had said, shaking her head in disapproval. It was ironic. They had betrayed us, thinking they'd find happiness with each other, but all they found was misery. Every scandal, every shout I imagined between them was a reminder that karma does its job. As I entered my apartment, the quiet was a balm to my soul. I was alone, Yes, but at peace. I had weathered a storm I never saw coming and came out stronger. I gazed out of my window, the world outside oblivious to my struggles and triumphs. Here's to new beginnings, I whispered to myself, a small but determined smile on my lips. I turned from the window, feeling a sense of empowerment. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I had survived, I had learned, and now it was time to live.
I never thought I'd be here, sitting in the living room of what used to be our house, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My name is Emily, and just a few months ago, I was living what I thought was a happy life with my husband, Mark. We were the couple everyone envied, or so I believed. Mark, once a charming and attentive man, had become someone I hardly recognized. His once warm eyes now seemed cold and distant. It all changed after my dad passed away. Dad was my rock, and losing him felt like losing a part of myself. But for Mark, it seemed like an opportunity. The evening air was heavy as I sat across from Mark, the silence between us a stark contrast to the laughter and love that once filled this room. "Are you even listening to me, Emily?" Mark's voice, sharp and impatient, broke the silence. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Yes, I'm listening," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's simple. I want a divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. This house, it's mine. You need to start looking for somewhere else to live." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had sensed the growing distance between us, but divorce? I was speechless. "You can't be serious, Mark. After all these years, you're just going to throw everything away?" I finally managed to say, my voice tinged with disbelief. Mark leaned back in his chair, a cold, unfazed look on his face. "It's not just throwing away, Emily. It's moving on. I've been feeling trapped in this marriage, and now, with your dad gone, I see no reason to continue this charade." I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. How could he be so cruel, so heartless? My father was gone, and now Mark, the man I had loved and trusted, was abandoning me too. "I don't understand you, Mark. You used to be so different, so caring. What happened to us?" Mark let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, please. Spare me the drama, Emily. You should start packing. The sooner you're out, the better." I sat there, stunned and hurt, trying to process everything. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the shattering of an illusion. The illusion of a happy life that I had clung to for so long. And now, I was alone, with nothing but memories of a love that turned out to be nothing but a facade. My life, already hanging by a thread, spiraled further into chaos with the arrival of Mrs. Harwood, Mark's mother. She moved in unannounced, bringing with her an air of hostility that choked the already tense atmosphere of the house. "Emily, I expect you to behave appropriately while I'm here," Mrs. Harwood declared, her voice sharp as she settled into the living room, making it clear that she considered herself in charge. I tried to reason with her. "Mrs. Harwood, I understand this is a difficult time for everyone, but I assure you, I have no intention of causing trouble." She fixed me with a cold stare. "Trouble seems to follow you, dear. I've seen how you and Mark have been living. It's no wonder my son wants a divorce." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her walk over me. "Mark and I are adults. We'll handle our matters ourselves. Your interference isn't needed." She scoffed. "Interference? I'm protecting my son from your manipulative ways. You've done enough damage already." The days that followed were a blur of constant snide remarks and belittling comments from Mrs. Harwood. She criticized everything from the way I dressed to the way I cooked. It felt like she was trying to erase my presence from the house. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, she came into the kitchen. "You're using too much salt. Don't you know anything about cooking?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "I've been cooking for myself and Mark for years. He's never complained." "Well, he's too kind to say anything, but I'm not. You're ruining his health with your terrible cooking." I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. "Mrs. Harwood, I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." She leaned against the counter, watching me like a hawk. "You can manage, can you? We'll see how long that lasts." Every interaction with her was an exercise in restraint. She had an opinion on everything and wasn't afraid to voice it, loudly and often. It was like she was trying to provoke me, to push me to my breaking point. Mark, for his part, did nothing to ease the tension. He avoided being in the same room with us, leaving me to fend for myself against his mother's relentless attacks. It was clear he had no intention of standing up for me, not anymore. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table, Mrs. Harwood sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know, Emily, it's not too late to leave gracefully. You could save yourself a lot of trouble." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I have as much right to be here as you do, Mrs. Harwood. I'm not leaving until the divorce is finalized." She smirked. "Stubborn, aren't you? Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Mark doesn't want you here, and neither do I. You're just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave." Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the unwelcome and precarious position I found myself in. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to stand my ground, no matter how difficult Mrs. Harwood made it. The house had become a battleground, and I was determined not to be the one who surrendered. Living with Mrs. Harwood under the same roof was like walking on eggshells. But the day she crossed the line was when she targeted my cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was more than just a pet. He was a part of my world, a comfort in my loneliest times. I came home to find Mrs. Harwood standing in the hallway, a look of disgust on her face as she glared at Whiskers. "That filthy animal," she spat. "I want it out of my son's house. It's either the cat or you, Emily." I felt a surge of anger. "Whiskers isn't going anywhere. He's part of this family." She sneered. "That thing is a nuisance. I won't have it shedding and spreading germs all over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's a harmless cat, Mrs. Harwood. You're being unreasonable." She moved closer, her voice cold and harsh. "Listen here, Emily. I call the shots now. Either that cat goes, or things will get very unpleasant for you." I knew arguing with her was futile. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I had to think fast. That's when I remembered my friend Sarah, an animal lover who had always adored Whiskers. I called Sarah, my voice shaky. "Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you look after Whiskers for a while? I'm in a bit of a situation here." Sarah was quick to respond. "Of course, Emily. What's going on? Are you okay?" I sighed. "It's a long story. I'll explain later. But thank you. You're a lifesaver." Packing Whiskers' things felt like a defeat, but I knew it was for the best. As I was about to leave with Whiskers, Mrs. Harwood blocked my path. "Finally, some sense," she said, a smug smile on her face. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I held back my anger. "This isn't over, Mrs. Harwood. I'm doing this for Whiskers, not for you." She laughed. "Oh, keep telling yourself that, dear, but we both know who's in charge here." One day, I found my clothes ruined. My favorite dress, my comfy sweaters, everything was bleached. It was no accident. I stormed into the living room where Mrs. Harwood was reading a magazine, looking too innocent. "Did you do this?" I held up the ruined dress, my voice shaking with anger. She looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, what happened to your dress?" "Don't play dumb, Mrs. Harwood. You put bleach in the wash," I accused. She shrugged, a smirk creeping onto her face. "Oh, that. I was cleaning the machine. Must have forgotten to rinse it out. Accidents happen, dear." I was fuming. "This wasn't an accident. You did this on purpose." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Prove it, Emily. It's my word against yours, and we both know who my son will believe." I felt helpless and defeated. She was right. Mark would never take my side over his mother's. Later that day, I confronted Mark. "Your mother ruined my clothes. You need to talk to her." Mark didn't even look up from his phone. "Mom said it was an accident. Stop making a big deal out of everything." I couldn't believe his indifference. "She's doing this on purpose, Mark. Can't you see what she's doing?" He sighed, annoyed. "Look, Emily, I don't want to get involved. Just stay out of her way." Stay out of her way? This was supposed to be my home, too. I realized then that I was alone in this. Mark wouldn't help me. His mother was out to get me, and I had to fend for myself. The destruction of my clothes was just the beginning of Mrs. Harwood's campaign against me. Each day brought a new challenge, a new way for her to assert her dominance and make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I started to notice little things missing or out of place. My favorite mug cracked, my pictures taken down from the walls, small but personal attacks. It was a psychological game, and she was playing to win. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. My books were scattered on the floor, pages torn. I confronted Mrs. Harwood, who was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. "Did you do this?" I asked, holding up a torn book. She glanced at it, then back at me, with a cold, indifferent expression. "Oh, those old things? I thought they were trash. You should be more careful about what you leave around." I was outraged. "These are my books, Mrs. Harwood. You have no right to touch them." She shrugged, unfazed. "This is my son's house. I'll do as I please. Maybe you should start packing your trash." I felt a burning anger, but also a sense of helplessness. Arguing with her was pointless. She had made it clear that she didn't respect me or my belongings. The next morning, I found my toiletries thrown in the trash. My shampoo, my face cream, everything gone. I dug them out, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just petty sabotage. It was a declaration of war. I confronted Mark again. "Your mother threw away my toiletries. This has to stop." He barely glanced at me. "Maybe it was a mistake. Just buy new ones." "A mistake? She's doing this deliberately, Mark. Can't you see that?" I was near tears, frustrated by his continued indifference. He stood up, his voice cold. "I'm not getting into this, Emily. Sort it out with her." Sort it out with her? How was I supposed to sort out deliberate cruelty? I tried to keep to myself, to avoid Mrs. Harwood, but she seemed to take my avoidance as a challenge. She'd make loud, snide comments about me on the phone, ensuring I could hear every word. She'd accidentally spill things on the floor I'd just cleaned, watch me as I cleaned up, a satisfied smirk on her face. One afternoon, I found my laptop screen cracked. It was the last straw. I stormed into the kitchen, where Mrs. Harwood was humming to herself. "What did you do to my laptop?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She turned, feigning ignorance. "Oh, did something happen to your laptop? That's unfortunate." "You did this, didn't you? You're trying to make my life hell." She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "You brought this on yourself, Emily. You're not wanted here. The sooner you realize that, the better." Just when I thought things couldn't get worse with Mrs. Harwood, she struck where it hurt the most. My father's pictures, the last memories I had of him, were gone. I had put them up in the living room, a small comfort in these trying times. But now, the walls were bare, as if he had never been a part of my life. I found Mrs. Harwood in the kitchen, smirking over a cup of coffee. "Where are my father's pictures?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, feigning confusion. "Pictures? Oh, those old things. We needed more space. This isn't a shrine, Emily." I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling. "Those were my father's pictures. You had no right to take them down." She shrugged, her voice cold and dismissive. "They were depressing, always staring at us. It's time to move on, Emily. He's gone, and clinging to the past won't change that." I couldn't believe her cruelty. "You can't just erase him from my life. Those pictures were all I had left of him." She stood up, towering over me. "Your father has nothing to do with this house. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Just like your marriage, it's in the past now." I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to show how much she had hurt me. But I knew that's what she wanted. So, I held back, biting my tongue. "You're heartless," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I'm practical, Emily. It's a trait you clearly lack. You should learn to let go." I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with loss and anger. Mrs. Harwood had taken the last piece of my father from me, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the empty spaces on the walls echoing in my mind. Mrs. Harwood's words kept replaying in my head. Let go. Move on. But how could I? Those pictures were more than just images. They were a connection to my father, a reminder of his love and presence in my life. I knew then that this was more than just a battle over living space. It was a fight for my memories, my past, and my identity. Mrs. Harwood had declared war on the most personal parts of my life, and I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my father's memory and my right to mourn him. It was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a call from a notary changed everything. I was sitting in my room, trying to muster the strength to face another day with Mrs. Harwood, when my phone rang. "Mrs. Emily Harwood? This is John Carter, the notary handling your father's will. We need you to come in to discuss some important matters," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. "My father's will? I wasn't aware he had left anything." "Yes, he did. It's quite urgent. Can you come in today?" Mr. Carter's tone was serious. I agreed, curiosity and a glimmer of hope stirring within me. Maybe this was the break I needed. At the notary's office, Mr. Carter handed me a folder. "Your father left you a significant amount of money, Miss Emily, enough to start a new life." I was speechless. My father, always the quiet supporter, had given me a lifeline. "And there's something else," Mr. Carter continued, handing me another set of documents. "Your father left these for you. He said they were important." I opened the documents, but Mr. Carter stopped me. "Perhaps you should look at these in private. They're quite personal." I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as I left the office. Back home, I locked myself in my room and began to read. The documents were records of financial transactions between my father and Mark. My father had lent Mark a significant amount of money, over $200,000. I couldn't believe it. All this time, Mark had been in debt to my father. Was this why he was so eager to divorce me after my father's death? Did he think the debt died with him? I felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. My father had given me more than just money. He had given me the power to fight back. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to make Mark pay for his deceit and Mrs. Harwood for her cruelty. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to set the rules. Armed with the truth about Mark's debt to my father, I felt a newfound sense of power. The day of the divorce signing, I was ready to turn the tables. As we sat in the lawyer's office, Mark and his mother smirking confidently, I waited for the right moment. Just as Mark was about to sign, I spoke up. "Before we finalize this, there's something you should know, Mark," I said, sliding the loan documents across the table. He glanced at them, his smirk fading fast. "What's this?" I leaned back, feeling in control for the first time in months. "That's the debt you owe my father, over $200,000. And now, it's owed to me." Mrs. Harwood's eyes widened in shock. "What debt? Mark, what is she talking about?" Mark's face was a mask of panic. "It's nothing, Mom. Just some old business between Emily's dad and me." I laughed. "So, you thought you'd get away with not repaying him? That's why you were so eager to get rid of me?" Mark didn't meet my eyes. "It's complicated, Emily. I was in trouble, and your dad offered to help." I shook my head, disgusted. "You were going to leave me with nothing while sitting on a debt you owed my father. You're despicable." He tried to touch me, but I backed away. "You've been hiding this. You owe me that money, and I intend to collect." The lawyer, a middle-aged man who had been silent till now, interjected. "If these documents are legitimate, Mr. Mark, you're legally obligated to repay this debt." Mrs. Harwood turned to her son, her voice rising. "You borrowed money from her father, and now we have to pay her?" Mark tried to speak, but I was faster. Yes, he did, and he thought he could escape it by divorcing me quickly after my father's death. The room was tense, the air thick with the revelation. Mrs. Harwood looked from the documents to Mark, her expression one of betrayal and anger. "You've been lying to us all along," she hissed at Mark. "You put us in this mess." Mark's usual confident demeanor had crumbled. He looked defeated, cornered. I had no choice. I was in trouble, and Emily's dad offered to help. I stood up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "Well, now you can repay that help." Every single dollar. You thought you could outsmart me, but you were wrong. Mrs. Harwood was fuming. We'll fight this. We won't let you take everything from us. But I knew I had the upper hand. You can try, but the law is on my side. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to repay the debt. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of triumph. For so long, I had been under Mark and his mother's control, their whims and cruelty dictating my life. But now, the tables had turned. I had them right where I wanted, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. This was my chance to get back what I was owed, and I was going to take it. The day Mark and Mrs. Harwood sold the house to repay the debt was the day I finally felt free. As they packed their last boxes, I couldn't help but savor the moment. You brought this on yourself, Mark, I said, watching him struggle with a heavy box. You could have been honest with me. He avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped. I know. I'm sorry, Emily. Mrs. Harwood, looking older and more defeated than ever, chimed in. This is all your fault. You've ruined everything. I shook my head, no longer affected by her words. No, Mrs. Harwood, you two did this to yourselves. I'm just claiming what's rightfully mine. They left without another word, and I watched as their car disappeared down the road. It was the end of an era, one filled with pain and betrayal, but also growth and resilience. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. It was time to start anew. With the money from my father and the repaid debt, I bought a small, cozy house, just for me and Whiskers, who I had brought back home. Sitting in my new living room, Whiskers purring on my lap, I called Sarah, my friend who had helped me through the darkest times. Hey Sarah, it's done. I'm finally free, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Sarah's voice was warm and excited. That's amazing, Emily. I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. I looked around my new home, a sense of peace settling over me. I have, and it's all thanks to people like you who stood by me. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Emily. What's next for you? Sarah asked. I thought for a moment. A fresh start. Building a life that's truly mine. And maybe helping others who've been through what I have. As I hung up, I realized that this was more than just a new house. It was a new chapter, one where I was in control, free from the shadows of the past. I had not only survived, I had come out stronger. I stood up, Whiskers following me as I walked to the window, looking out at my small garden. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and to find joy in the simple things. I had lost much, but I had gained even more, a sense of self, strength, and the courage to move forward. This was my story, my journey, and it was just beginning. My name's Melly, and I guess you could say my life turned upside down when I met Alex. We clicked instantly at the accounting firm where we both worked, and before I knew it, we were planning a wedding. I was over the moon, of course, but meeting his family, that was a whole different ballgame. Alex always talked about his mom, Mrs. Donovan, with such admiration. So, the day we were supposed to meet her for dinner, I was a bundle of nerves, smoothing down my simple blue dress and double-checking my reflection for the umpteenth time. Relax, Melly, she's going to love you, Alex assured me as we drove to his childhood home. But the moment we walked through the door, Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. Well, you're certainly slender, aren't you? She remarked, her tone cool. I tried to laugh it off. I guess I am. Never been much of an eater. Mrs. Donovan hummed, her expression unreadable. I hope you're taking care of yourself. A woman should have some robustness, you know. Alex, bless him, jumped in. Mom, Melly's just fine. She's healthy. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. Mrs. Donovan's eyes were constantly on me, making me squirm every time I took a bite. I could feel her judging my every move. The worst part came when I excused myself to the restroom. As I passed the living room, I overheard Mrs. Donovan whispering to her sister, "She looks sickly. How will she bear Alex's healthy children?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The rest of the evening was a blur. I barely touched my food and struggled to keep a smile plastered on my face. On the drive back, I was quiet, the words echoing in my mind. Alex noticed. "Hey, you okay? You've been quiet since dinner." I sighed. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But inside, I was reeling. Mrs. Donovan's words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I wondered if this was just the beginning of a long road of judgment and disapproval. Little did I know, it was only the tip of the iceberg. As the days turned into weeks, the dinners at Mrs. Donovan's became a regular ordeal. Each invitation felt like a summons, each meal a trial. Alex, ever the optimist, kept reassuring me that things would get better, but they only seemed to worsen. One particular evening stands out in my memory. We arrived at Mrs. Donovan's to find an even more extravagant spread than usual. The dining table was overflowing with dishes, rich gravies, fatty roasts, and sides heavy with butter and cream. As soon as we sat down, Mrs. Donovan was on the offensive. "Melly, you look even thinner than last time. You really should eat more," she said, piling my plate high with food. I tried to protest. "Oh, Mrs. Donovan, this is too much. I really can't." "Nonsense," she cut me off. "You need to build some strength, dear. Especially if you and Alex are planning a family." I forced a smile and took a bite. Mrs. Donovan's eyes flickered with something like triumph. I glanced at Alex, hoping for some support, but he just shrugged apologetically. I felt my stomach knot up, not just from the rich food, but from the undercurrent of criticism in her words. Dinner progressed with painful slowness. Mrs. Donovan kept pushing more food my way, commenting on every bite I took, or didn't take. "You know, Melly, a good wife should know how to cook hearty meals. It's important for a family." I felt a sting at her words. "I do cook, Mrs. Donovan, but I prefer healthier options." She scoffed. "Healthy is fine, but this," she gestured at my barely touched plate, "is just pickiness. You're setting a bad example." By the end of the meal, I was both nauseous and seething with anger. The drive home was tense. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Alex, your mom's comments are really hurtful. It's like she's constantly judging me." Alex was silent for a moment before responding. "I know, Melly. I'll talk to her, okay? I'm sure she doesn't mean it the way it sounds." But a part of me doubted that anything would change. Mrs. Donovan had made her feelings clear, and no amount of talking seemed to soften her stance. Each subsequent dinner only reinforced my feelings of inadequacy. Mrs. Donovan's remarks became more pointed, her scrutiny more intense. "Melly, are you avoiding my food deliberately? You barely eat anything I make." I tried to explain. "It's not that, Mrs. Donovan. Your food is very rich, and it doesn't always agree with me." She tutted disapprovingly. "A little discomfort is nothing. You need to eat more, put on some weight. It's not healthy to be so thin." Her words echoed in my head long after each dinner, amplifying my insecurities and doubts. The thought of facing another meal at her house filled me with dread. My relationship with Alex was strong, but the shadow of his mother's disapproval loomed over us, a constant, unsettling presence. As I lay awake many nights, I wondered how long I could endure this. The discomfort in my stomach after each meal was a stark reminder of the growing discomfort in my heart. I felt like an outsider, unwelcome and misunderstood, and I couldn't help but worry about the future of our relationship under the weight of his mother's judgment. As the days rolled into weeks, my unease around Mrs. Donovan turned into outright dread. The constant scrutiny, the endless comments about my weight and eating habits, it was all becoming too much. So I made a decision, one that I knew wouldn't sit well with her. I started avoiding meals at her house. The next time Alex mentioned going over for dinner, I hesitated before speaking up. "Alex, I don't think I can go tonight." He looked surprised. "Why not? Mom's making that roast you liked." I took a deep breath. "It's not about the food. It's... Your mom makes me uncomfortable. I can't keep pretending it's okay." Alex's face fell. "Melly, she's just trying to be caring in her own way. She doesn't mean to upset you." I shook my head, frustration building up. "It's not caring, Alex. It feels like she's attacking me, always commenting on how I look, what I eat. I can't deal with it anymore." We left it at that, but I could tell Alex was torn. He wanted to keep the peace, but I needed him to understand my side. The next family dinner I missed set off a real storm. Mrs. Donovan called me the next day, her voice icy. "Melly, I noticed you didn't grace us with your presence last night. Is everything all right?" I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Donovan, I just wasn't feeling up to it." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Not feeling up to it? You do realize it's rude to decline family dinners without a good reason. You're part of this family now, or so I thought." Her words stung, and I felt my patience snap. "With all due respect, Mrs. Donovan, being part of this family shouldn't mean I have to endure being criticized all the time." There was a moment of stunned silence before she retorted, "Criticism? I'm merely concerned about your health, Melly. A wife should be strong, healthy. I'm worried you're not suitable for Alex." That hit a nerve. Suitable? I love Alex and he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion on my health. The conversation ended soon after, but the damage was done. The rift between us grew wider, deeper. Alex tried to mediate, but his attempts only made things worse. One evening, as we sat quietly in our living room, he broached the subject. "Melly, I spoke to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Avoiding her? She's been nothing but harsh and judgmental since day one. What does she expect?" Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. "She's my mom, Melly. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two try to work things out?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Alex, it's not about working things out, it's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know if I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt." The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, at least until the reception. Everything was perfect. The ceremony, the vows, Alex looking at me like I was the only one in the room. But then, at the reception, everything changed. I remember holding a glass of wine, the same wine everyone else was drinking. It tasted a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I took a sip, and that's the last thing I remember before waking up in a stark white hospital room. Confused and groggy, I tried to sit up. That's when I heard them, Alex and his mom, just outside my room. Mrs. Donovan's voice was sharp. "See what I mean, Alex? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family." I felt a pang of hurt, but I was too weak to respond. Alex's voice, full of worry, cut through. "Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened." I wanted to shout, to tell them I was okay, that I wasn't weak. But my voice was a mere whisper. Then the door opened, and a doctor walked in, a serious look on his face. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, addressing me, "you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony?" I shook my head weakly. "No, nothing. Just the wine." The doctor frowned. "The wine? But no one else had this reaction. It's very unusual." Alex stepped in, his face etched with concern. "Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink?" The doctor hesitated. "It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run some more tests." I lay there, stunned. Someone had drugged me? On my wedding day? But who? And why? As the doctor left to arrange the tests, Alex came to my side, taking my hand. "Melly, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening." I tried to smile, to reassure him, but my mind was racing. The only thing I could taste was the bitterness of the wine and Mrs. Donovan's harsh words echoing in my head. That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. The realization that someone might have deliberately hurt me was terrifying, and the worst part was not knowing who or why. I looked over at Alex, asleep in the chair next to my bed, and felt a wave of sadness. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love. Instead, it ended with me in a hospital bed, surrounded by suspicion and fear. Back home from the hospital, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought that someone had drugged me at my own wedding was like a dark cloud hanging over me. And deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion about who it might be. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. I turned to him, my voice shaky. "Alex, I need to talk to you about something serious. He muted the TV, looking concerned. What's up, Melly? I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake off the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it. Alex's face changed instantly. What? Melly, that's crazy talk. Why would you even think that? I could feel my frustration mounting. Think about it, Alex. All those comments, the way she's always on my case. And then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted odd? It's not that far-fetched. Alex stood up, pacing the room. Melly, you're talking about my mom. She can be tough, sure, but she wouldn't do something like that. You're letting your imagination run wild. I stood up too, my voice rising. Am I, Alex? Or have you just been turning a blind eye to all the things she's said and done? Can't you see she doesn't like me? He stopped pacing, looking pained. Melly, this is serious. Accusing someone of drugging you, that's a big deal. You can't just throw around accusations without proof. I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought you'd at least consider what I'm saying, but it seems like you'll always take her side. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about taking sides, Melly. It's about being rational. We can't accuse people based on a hunch. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. So, what am I supposed to do? Just forget it happened? He came over, trying to put his arm around me, but I stepped back. We need to think this through, Melly. Maybe talk to the police again, see if they found anything new. I nodded, though I felt far from convinced. Fine, we'll talk to them. But Alex, if it turns out I'm right, I don't know what I'll do. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going back to Mrs. Donovan, her words, her looks. The doubt and fear were like a poison, and I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A couple of weeks after the hospital incident, we were invited to another family gathering at Mrs. Donovan's house. I was hesitant to go, but Alex insisted it would be good for us to show a united front. As we walked into Mrs. Donovan's house, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel eyes on me, whispering under their breath. Mrs. Donovan greeted us with a smile. Melly, dear, so glad you could make it, she said, her voice dripping with something that didn't quite sound like sincerity. I forced a smile back. Thank you for having us, Mrs. Donovan. Dinner was served, and I noticed Mrs. Donovan made a point of bringing me a separate dish. I made this especially for you, Melly, considering your delicate condition. Her emphasis on delicate didn't go unnoticed. I eyed the dish warily. It looked normal, but after the wedding, I couldn't be sure. Alex, oblivious to my discomfort, started eating his meal. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Mrs. Donovan watched me, a hint of a smirk on her face. Not hungry, Melly? I made it just for you. I looked up, meeting her gaze. I'm just not feeling all that well, Mrs. Donovan, but thank you. The room was filled with murmurs and side glances. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. Alex, noticing my discomfort, leaned in. You okay? I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if she had done something to the food again? I couldn't take any chances. I whispered to Alex, Can we switch plates? I'm not comfortable eating this. He looked confused, but obliged, swapping our plates. As he reached for a bite of my food, Mrs. Donovan's hand shot out, stopping him. No, Alex, don't! She exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were now on her. Alex looked up, startled. Mom? What's wrong? Mrs. Donovan's face had lost all color. She stammered, looking for an excuse. It's just... That dish is specially made for Melly. It's not to everyone's taste. I stared at her, my suspicions growing stronger. Why not, Mrs. Donovan? What's in it that's so special? She fumbled for words, her usual composure slipping away. It's just a special recipe. The tension in the room was palpable. Alex looked between his mother and me, confusion turning to realization. Mom, what did you do? Mrs. Donovan was silent, her eyes darting around the room. I knew then, without a doubt, that my suspicions were right. There was something in that food, something she didn't want Alex to eat. The room was heavy with tension following the incident with the plates. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, on Mrs. Donovan, who looked like she was caught in a trap. Alex, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, turned to his mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Melly's food?" Mrs. Donovan was fumbling for words, her usual poise nowhere to be seen. "It's nothing, just... It was made for Melly, not for you." I couldn't hold back anymore. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Donovan. You've been against me from the start. What did you put in my food?" The room erupted into murmurs. Mrs. Donovan's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I didn't put anything in your food, Melly. This is ridiculous." I stood up, my hands trembling. "It's not ridiculous. Ever since I started coming to these dinners, I felt sick. And then the wedding. Someone drugged my drink, and now this? It's too much of a coincidence." Alex stood up too, his voice firm. "Mom, if you did something to Melly's food, you need to tell us now. This is serious." Mrs. Donovan's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Alex. She's not right for you. She's weak, sickly." I felt a surge of anger. Protect him? By making me sick? By drugging me? The guests were now openly staring, the air thick with accusation and shock. Alex's uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "This is a serious accusation, Melly. Do you have any proof?" I pointed to my plate. "I'm calling the police, and they will give the food prepared by Mrs. Donovan for examination." And then Mrs. Donovan burst into tears. "I just wanted the best for my son. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier." The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alex looked at his mother, his expression one of utter betrayal. "You did this to Melly? My wife?" I felt a mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth was out, but despair at the cost. My relationship with Alex, our place in his family, everything was in shambles. The rest of the evening was a haze. There were arguments, people taking sides, some in disbelief, others in anger. Alex and I left early, the weight of what had happened bearing down on us. As we drove home, neither of us spoke. The silence was oppressive, filled with unasked questions and unspoken fears. What did this mean for us? For our future? The woman who was supposed to be my family had betrayed me in the worst way, and the fallout was something neither Alex nor I were prepared to handle. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Mrs. Donovan's confession, the look of shock on Alex's face, the whispers of the guests. The confrontation had brought the truth to light, but it had also opened a wound that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One evening, as Alex and I sat together, the silence between us felt particularly profound. Breaking the stillness, I turned to Alex. "We need to talk about what's next, about the police." He looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. "I've been thinking about that too. It's your decision, Melly. I'll back you up, whatever you choose." I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. It's just, going to the police feels like opening a Pandora's box. It's not just about exposing what happened, it's about airing family issues in public. He nodded understandingly. "I know it's hard, but remember, you're the one who's been wronged. If you want to pursue this legally, I'm with you." After a pause, I let out a deep breath. "No, I don't think I want to go down that road, but there's something else I've decided." I hesitated, gathering my courage. "I can't see your mother again, Alex. After everything, I can't." Alex's reaction was quiet, contemplative. "I understand. And honestly, I feel the same. After what she did, I can't just carry on as if nothing's happened. I won't see her either." His words were a relief, a validation of my feelings. "It's going to be hard, Alex. She's your mother." He squeezed my hand, firm and reassuring. "I know, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship, our marriage, comes first." In the days that followed, we both stood by our decision. It was a difficult period, adjusting to this new reality where Mrs. Donovan was no longer a part of our lives. There were moments of doubt, of questioning whether we were too harsh, but we supported each other through them. We started focusing more on ourselves, on rebuilding and strengthening our bond. We made plans for the future, small things to look forward to, like weekend getaways and quiet evenings together. As we moved forward, I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had brought us closer. We had faced a challenge together, one that tested the very foundation of our relationship and had come out stronger.
My name is Lena. I'm sitting here, my laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank page. I'm a writer, known for thrillers that keep readers up at night. But today, I'm not writing fiction. I'm writing about me, about where I come from. It's not a pretty story, but it's mine. My mom, Claire Valmont, was a big deal in the TV world. Beautiful, charming, the kind of woman who lit up a room. I remember watching her on TV, admiring how everyone seemed to love her. But that was just one side of her. When I was a kid, I never really understood why I had to live so differently. Born with a hair lip, I had surgery as a baby. But to Mom, I was a mistake, something to hide. "We can't let people see you like this," she'd say, her voice cold, as she adjusted the medical mask on my face. "You understand, right? It's for your own good." I grew up in a big house, but it felt like a prison. I was always alone, except for the nanny, Mrs. Jenkins. She was kind but scared of Mom. Everyone was. One day, I heard Mom talking on the phone. "Yes, she's always sick. Poor thing. It's a severe immune disease," she lied so effortlessly. I knew then that she was ashamed of me, that she saw me as a burden. My dad? He wasn't around much after the divorce. I heard he was living it up with his new family. I used to imagine him coming to rescue me, but he never did. I didn't go to school like other kids. A tutor came home to teach me. "Keep your mask on," she'd remind me, just like Mom. I turned 10 that year. I was sitting in my room, my only sanctuary, when Mom walked in. She looked at me, her expression hard to read. "Mom, if you hate me so much, why don't you just send me to Dad?" I asked. I needed to know, even if it hurt. She laughed, a harsh, cold sound. "And let the world think I abandoned my sick child? No, we can't have that. Better they think I'm a saint, caring for her ailing daughter." That night, I cried myself to sleep. I was just a prop in her perfect world, a secret she was desperate to keep. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be a secret forever. I often think about how different my life was from other kids. There I was, cooped up in my room, a mask covering half my face, while they were probably out playing, laughing, living. My world was small, confined to the walls of my room, my imagination the only place I could be free. Every morning started the same. I'd wake up to the muffled sounds of the house, slip on the mask that had become my unwanted companion, and sit down for breakfast. Mrs. Jenkins, our housekeeper and my nanny, would bring it in, her face always wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear," she'd say, setting down my tray. "Your mother left early for a shoot. She said to remind you to keep your mask on." I nodded, used to the routine. It was always like this. Mom was either absent, busy with her glamorous life, or when she was home, I was just a problem she had to deal with. Some days, I'd try to talk to Mrs. Jenkins to get some glimpse of the outside world. "What's it like out there, Mrs. Jenkins? Are the flowers blooming?" She'd pause, a sigh escaping her. "Yes, the garden is lovely. I wish you could see it." But wishes were useless in my world. As I grew older, the isolation ate at me. I watched TV, saw other kids my age doing normal things, and it burned. I wanted that. I wanted to be normal. But Mom's voice would always echo in my head, "Normal? You'll never be normal." Sometimes, I'd rebel, in small ways. One day, I left my room, mask off, just to feel a moment of freedom. Mom caught me, her face twisting in anger. "What are you doing? Do you want the whole world to see you like this?" she yelled. Her words were like slaps, each one stinging more than the last. "I just wanted some air," I stammered. "Air? You have a window. Use it," she snapped, pushing me back into my room. "You're grounded. No TV for a week." That night, I lay in bed, feeling the weight of the world on me. I was her secret, her shame. She didn't see me as a daughter, just a mistake she had to hide. My only solace was my writing. I poured my heart into those pages, creating stories where I was brave, strong, loved. Writing was my voice when I had none. One evening, Mrs. Jenkins found me scribbling furiously. She watched me for a moment, then said softly, "You know, you're quite good at that. Maybe one day, you'll be a writer." I looked up, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so," she said, a rare firmness in her voice. "You've got talent, and more importantly, you've got something to say." That stuck with me, gave me a glimmer of hope in my dreary world. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made me want more, made me dream of a life where I wasn't just the girl behind the mask. I started to imagine what it would be like to leave this place, to find a world where I wasn't just a shadow. Sometimes life throws you a lifeline when you're drowning in despair. That's what happened to me one dreary Tuesday, a day that felt as gray as my thoughts. Everything changed with a phone call. The phone, an old relic, hardly ever rang, so when it did, it jolted me. Mrs. Jenkins answered, her face turning pale as she listened. Then she came to me, her voice barely a whisper. "It's your father." My father, the man who had become more a figment of my imagination than a real person over the years, was on the line. I felt a mix of excitement and fear gripping me as I took the phone. "Hey, Lena," his voice was unexpectedly warm. I saw your mother's show. She said you were dying." I closed my eyes, a wave of emotions washing over me. That show. I had watched it too, hidden away in my room. Mom, tears in her eyes, telling the world her daughter was on the brink of death. It was a performance worthy of an award. And it was all lies. "I'm not dying, Dad. I'm right here," I said, my voice a mix of anger and relief. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sorry for everything. I want to make things right. How about you come live with me?" The offer was like a ray of sunlight in my dark world. Leave? Could I actually leave this house of lies and pretend love? "Yes," I said quickly, without a second thought. "I want to come." The days that followed were a whirlwind. My father came to get me, a man aged by time but still recognizable as the dad I remembered. Beside him was Linda, his new wife, her smile warm and inviting. "We're here for you," she said, her words simple but sincere. It felt like a promise. Mom watched from the doorway as I left, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word, didn't try to stop me. I looked back once, hoping for something, a sign of regret maybe, but she had already turned away, retreating back into her perfect, false world. Living with Dad and Linda was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. For the first time in forever, I didn't have to wear the mask. I could just be myself, though I was still figuring out who that was. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a concept still foreign to me, Linda asked, "What do you enjoy doing?" "You know, for fun." I hesitated, unaccustomed to anyone taking an interest in me. "I write," I said eventually. "Stories." "That's wonderful." Linda's eyes lit up. "You should share them with us sometime." In that moment, a seed of hope was planted in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a place in this new world, a world where I was more than just a secret to be hidden away. Stepping into life with Dad and Linda was like walking into a different world, one where I felt like I belonged, like I was part of a real family, not a facade built on lies. One evening, Dad sat me down. There was a look in his eyes, a mix of concern and hope. "We've been thinking," he began cautiously, "about getting you the best care to help you move forward." I instinctively tensed up at the mention of doctors. "I'm tired of doctors," I replied, the words coming out sharper than I intended. He nodded, understanding my apprehension. "It's not just about appearances. It's about healing, inside and out. We want you to be happy, truly happy." Linda added softly, "You've been through so much. It's time you had a chance to heal completely." Their words sank in, and I agreed to it. We found a top-notch clinic, and the surgeon there, Dr. Avery, was different from any I'd encountered. He didn't just see a patient, he saw a person. The day before the surgery, he said to me, "Remember, this isn't about changing who you are. It's about helping you see yourself in a new light." The surgery was more successful than I could have hoped. For the first time, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't feel disgust. I saw a reflection that surprised me. I even bore a resemblance to my mother, her beauty that I never thought I could share. But it wasn't just about the physical change. The real journey was the therapy that followed with Dr. Klein. It was about untangling the web of emotions and scars inside me. In one session, I found myself breaking down. "I'm just so angry," I confessed, tears streaming down my face. Angry at my mom, at the world, at myself. Dr. Klein handed me a tissue, her gaze steady. "It's okay to feel angry. But remember, you also have the power to let go of that anger, in your own time." It was a long, tough climb, but slowly, I started to feel a shift inside me. The anger began to ebb away, replaced by something calmer, more like peace or perhaps acceptance. As the days passed, Linda noticed the change. "You're smiling more," she remarked one evening, a note of happiness in her voice. I touched my face, almost in wonder. "Yeah, I guess I am. It feels right." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like the author of my own story. Not defined by my past, my scars, or my mother's shadow, but by my own strength and resilience. I started writing thrillers under a pseudonym, pouring every ounce of my tumultuous past into them. As I healed and grew, so did my stories. They became more mature, more gripping. By the time I was 28, I was a successful author, my books flying off the shelves. But despite my success, I always kept my true identity a closely guarded secret. Then, out of nowhere, the past called me. Literally. I was at home, scribbling notes for my next book, when the phone rang. Dad answered and, after a brief conversation, his face clouded with confusion. "It's for you," he said, handing me the phone. "Something about a TV show." I took the phone, my heart skipping a beat. "Hello?" "Hi, is this Lena Holmes?" a chirpy voice asked. "I'm calling from Straight Talk, hosted by Claire Valmont. We're huge fans of your work and would love to have you on the show." Claire Valmont. My mother. The words hit me like a wave, leaving me momentarily speechless. I'll think about it," I managed to stammer out. After hanging up, I turned to Dad and Linda, who were both looking at me with concern. It was Mom's show. They want me as a guest. Linda's eyes widened. "Oh, my. Are you okay?" I nodded, a plan slowly forming in my mind. "I'm more than okay. I think it's time to face her. To show her, and everyone else, who I really am." Dad looked worried. "Are you sure? That's a big step." I felt a surge of determination. I've never been more sure of anything. It's time she knew the truth. So, I called them back and agreed to go on the show. As the day approached, my nerves were a tangled mess, but underneath it all was a steady current of resolve. I was ready to take back my story. The day of the show, Linda hugged me tightly before I left. "You're brave and strong," she said, her voice full of pride. Remember that, no matter what happens. The studio was a frenzy of activity, lights, and cameras everywhere. And there she was, Claire Valmont, as poised and charismatic as ever. She hadn't seen me yet. A producer approached me, all smiles. Ready to meet Claire? She's excited to have the mysterious author of The Wolf Trap on her show. I nodded, feeling an odd sense of calm. Yes, I'm ready. As I walked onto the set, my mother turned, her professional smile in place. Then her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty. Welcome, she said, recovering quickly. We're all eager to hear about your thrilling novels. Where do you find your inspiration? I looked into the camera, then back at her. Well, I began, my voice steady. Let's just say my childhood was quite eventful. The air was thick with unspoken words, the tension palpable. This was it. My moment of truth. Sitting across from my mother on live TV, my heart was pounding, but my voice was calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment to confront the ghost of my past. So, my mother started, her TV smile flawless. Your books have been a huge success. What's the secret to creating such spine-tingling stories? I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded. Truth is often stranger than fiction, I said, my voice even. My books, they're drawn from real experiences, real pain. Her smile faltered for a second. Real experiences? How intriguing. Can you give us an example? I took a deep breath. Well, let's start with a girl who was hidden away from the world because of her appearance. A girl who was told she was a burden, an embarrassment. The color drained from her face, her professional mask beginning to crack. I see. That's quite a dark inspiration. I didn't back down. Yes, it is. That girl was me, Claire. And you are the mother who hid her away. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. My mother's face was a picture of shock and disbelief. What are you saying? She stammered. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, I replied firmly. You're Claire Valmont, the woman who told the world her daughter was dying, just to gain sympathy. The woman who locked her daughter away because she couldn't bear the thought of having a child that wasn't perfect. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked around, as if seeking an escape. The producer tried to intervene. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, I cut in, turning to the camera. There's no misunderstanding. For years, I lived in a shadow, hidden away, my very existence denied. But not anymore. I could see the panic in my mother's eyes now. She was losing control of the narrative, the perfect image she had crafted for herself. This is absurd, she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. You're making this up. Why would I do such things? Because to you, image was everything. And I didn't fit that image, I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. But I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I'm here to tell my story, the real story. The show cut to a break, the tension in the studio palpable. My mother was speechless, her facade shattered. For the first time, I felt like I was in control, no longer a victim of her lies and manipulation. The aftermath of the TV show was like a storm that had been brewing for years, finally breaking. The media went into a frenzy. My phone was ringing off the hook, journalists clamoring for more of my story. And through it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, no longer a burden I carried alone. The next day, Dad and Linda were glued to the TV, watching the news coverage. You've started quite the firestorm, Dad said, his voice a mix of concern and admiration. Linda nodded, her eyes on the screen. But you did what you needed to do. We're proud of you. I sat with them, watching as my mother's once flawless image was picked apart. There were debates, discussions, people expressing shock and sympathy. Then, the phone rang. It was the TV network. I answered, bracing myself. "We've never seen a reaction like this," the voice on the other end said, a bit frantic. "Your mother, she's been suspended. The show's on hold." I let out a slow breath. "I see." After hanging up, I turned to Dad and Linda. "They've suspended her. The show's on hold." Dad shook his head. "I never thought it would come to this." "I didn't either," I admitted. "But maybe now she'll understand the impact of her actions." The days that followed were a whirlwind. My story was everywhere. People were talking, not just about the scandal, but about my books, my journey. I was invited to interviews, podcasts, book signings. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. One night, Linda sat down with me, a serious look on her face. "Are you okay with all of this, Lena? It's a lot to handle." I thought about it. I am. It's like I've finally taken control of my own narrative. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help someone else out there who's going through their own struggle. As the dust settled, my mother's career took a hit. She became reclusive, shying away from the public eye. It wasn't my intention to ruin her, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Dad hugged me one evening, a bit of sadness in his eyes. "You did what you had to do. And we're here for you, no matter what." "Yeah," I said, feeling a sense of closure. It's time to move forward, to keep writing my story, but on my own terms. After the whirlwind of the confrontation and its fallout, life started to settle into a new kind of normal. I was busier than ever, with book signings and interviews, but there was a sense of peace within me that I had never felt before. I was no longer hiding, no longer a secret. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with Dad and Linda, the sun setting in a blaze of colors. Dad broke the silence. "You know, Lena, I never imagined things turning out this way. But I'm glad they did. You've come so far." Linda nodded, taking my hand. "You're an inspiration, not just to us, but to so many out there." I smiled, feeling a warm glow in my heart. "Thanks. It feels good to finally be myself, to not be afraid of the truth." We talked about the future, about my next book. I was already working on it, pouring my newfound sense of self into the pages. It was more than just a thriller, it was a story of triumph, of overcoming the odds. The next day, I met with my editor, a no-nonsense woman who had always believed in me. "Your story, it's powerful," she said, her eyes scanning the manuscript. "It's going to resonate with a lot of people." I felt a surge of pride. I hope so. It's the most honest thing I've ever written. As the days passed, I found a new rhythm, a balance between my public persona and my personal life. I was still writing, still sharing my story, but I also took time for myself, for Dad and Linda, for the life we had built together. One afternoon, I sat down to write in my journal, a habit I had maintained since I was a child. It was a moment of reflection, of looking back and looking forward. I wrote about the journey, about the pain and the triumph, about the love and support I had found. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of contentment. My past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was more than the girl in the mask, more than the daughter of Claire Valmont. I was a writer, a survivor, a woman who had found her voice. As I looked out the window, I realized that this was just the beginning. There were more stories to tell, more chapters to write in my life. And I was ready for whatever came next. My life, as I had come to know it, was nestled in a small but charming home filled with the laughter of my 2-year-old son, Leo, and the steady, reassuring presence of my husband, Michael. I was 31, a former career woman who had climbed the corporate ladder faster than most. My journey had begun in a large company where I first met Michael. He was a junior member of my team back then, bright and ambitious, but still finding his footing. Our story was not the typical office romance. I was his superior, a fact that made our initial interactions cautious and professional. I remember the first project we worked on together. His ideas were fresh, his approach unconventional. It intrigued me. After hours, we'd often find ourselves last to leave the office, our discussions spilling over from work to life, dreams, and aspirations. It was during one of these late evenings, under the dim lights of the empty office, that our relationship took a turn. Michael, with a hesitancy that was uncharacteristic, had asked me out for coffee. "It's just coffee, as colleagues," he had said. But we both knew it was more. Fast forward through a year of discreet dates and stolen moments, we got married. It felt like a whirlwind, yet perfectly natural. Our wedding was a simple affair, just close friends and family. The highlight was when Michael, in his vows, promised not only to love and cherish me but to always respect and support my ambitions. When Leo came into our lives, everything changed. I made the decision to step away from my career to focus on our son. It wasn't an easy choice, but holding Leo for the first time, I knew it was what I wanted. Michael supported me through it all, his own career steadily advancing as he stepped into more prominent roles at work. Our home became a reflection of our new life. The walls, once lined with my various awards and accolades, now held family photos and Leo's artwork. The spare room, which was once my home office, transformed into a nursery, painted in soft pastels. Despite the joy and fulfillment motherhood brought, there were moments when I missed my career. I missed the challenges, the sense of achievement, and even the office politics. I often found myself reminiscing about my professional accomplishments, wondering what could have been if I had stayed. Michael, aware of my inner turmoil, would often encourage me to consider going back. "You were amazing at what you did, Anna. Leo's growing, and maybe it's time for you to reclaim that part of yourself," he would say. One such evening, as I was preparing dinner, Michael came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Have you thought more about going back to work?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned off the stove and leaned back into him. "I have, but I'm not sure, Michael. It's not just about me anymore. We have Leo to think about." He kissed the top of my head. "We'll figure it out together. We always do." The sun was just starting to set, casting a warm glow through the kitchen window as I prepared dinner. Leo was playing with his toys in the living room, occasionally letting out a cheerful laugh. It was a typical evening, or so I thought, until my phone rang, displaying a name I hadn't seen in a while, Mr. Thompson, my former boss. Curious, I answered, "Mr. Thompson? This is a surprise. How can I help you?" "Anna, good to hear your voice. I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone hinting at something important. "Oh, what kind of proposition?" I asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "We're looking for a new head of the department. Your name came up, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be interested in coming back?" Mr. Thompson's offer hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was momentarily speechless. I'm flattered, Mr. Thompson. But I need to think about it." "Of course, take your time. But remember, we'd love to have you back," he replied. As I hung up, my mind raced with possibilities. Returning to work, leading a department, it was a dream opportunity. But as Michael walked in, his face tired from a long day at work, I felt a pang of uncertainty. "Who was that on the phone?" Michael asked, peeling off his jacket. "It was Mr. Thompson. They want me back at work, as the head of the department," I said, trying to gauge his reaction. Michael's face hardened. "Head of the department? That's the position I've been eyeing. They promised me a shot at it." I was taken aback. "I didn't know you applied for it. Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't think it mattered. Besides, you're happy here, aren't you?" His words stung. "I am, but this is a huge opportunity for me. I can't just ignore it." Michael's expression softened slightly, but his stance was firm. "Anna, I need this promotion. It's not just about the money, it's about my career. I want you to call Mr. Thompson back and decline the offer." I felt a mix of emotions: surprise, disappointment, anger. You want me to turn it down? Just like that? Yes, I do. It's important to me, Anna. Please, he pleaded. The room felt smaller as I processed his words. Michael's insistence felt like a betrayal, a dismissal of my aspirations. I realized then that our perfect life was more fragile than I had thought. The tension in the house was palpable since the phone call about the job. Michael, perhaps sensing the distance growing between us, started a new tradition, taking Leo out on weekend mornings, leaving me with a few precious hours to myself. On one such Saturday, as Michael was bundling Leo up in his little jacket, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. You sure you want to do this every weekend? It's a lot of work, taking Leo out alone, I said, watching them by the door. Michael looked back at me, a determined look on his face. I got this, Anna. You need a break. Besides, Leo loves our little adventures, don't you, buddy? He ruffled Leo's hair, who giggled in response. As the door closed behind them, the house fell into a silence that felt both comforting and unsettling. I poured myself a coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the weight of my thoughts heavier than the mug in my hands. Hours later, when they returned, Michael had a victorious grin on his face. We conquered the playground, didn't we, champ? He said, helping Leo off with his shoes. Leo's face was flushed with excitement. We saw a doggy, mommy. A big one. His innocent joy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile. That sounds wonderful, honey, I said, bending down to give Leo a hug. I looked up at Michael, trying to read his expression. Did you have fun too? Michael nodded, a hint of something softer in his eyes. Yeah, it was good. We should do this more. It's good for him. And for us. His words, simple as they were, hit me unexpectedly. It was an olive branch, a small step towards mending the rift that had formed between us. Maybe I could join you next time, I suggested tentatively. He paused, then nodded. Sure, that could be nice. As I watched them play in the living room, a sense of normalcy crept back into our home. The job offer still hung over us like a dark cloud, but in these moments, it felt like we could find our way back to each other. The weekend had unfolded in its usual rhythm. Michael had taken Leo out for their Saturday morning walk, a routine that had become their special father-son time. As I settled in with a cup of tea, I remembered the smartwatch I had secretly slipped onto Leo's wrist for safety. Michael didn't know about it. I thought it was better that way, just a small measure of reassurance for me. Casually, I opened the app on my phone to check their location, expecting to see them at the nearby park as usual. But the blinking dot on the map was nowhere near the park. It was several blocks away, in a residential area unfamiliar to me. My heart raced with confusion and concern. I dialed Michael's number, trying to keep my voice calm. Hey, where are you guys? Leo wanted to show me something he found in the park, but we can't seem to find it. There was a brief pause before Michael replied, his voice too nonchalant. We're just at the park, near the pond. Leo's having a blast feeding the ducks. His words didn't match the GPS location. I felt a knot in my stomach. Sounds fun. See you when you get back, I said, ending the call. As I hung up, a flurry of questions invaded my thoughts. Why would Michael lie about their location? What was he hiding? I decided not to confront him about the smartwatch. I needed to know more, to understand what was happening before revealing my hand. The rest of the morning, I was restless, my mind spinning with possible explanations. When they returned home, Leo was his usual cheerful self, chattering about the ducks and the playground. Michael seemed relaxed, unaware of my inner turmoil. How was the park? I asked, watching Michael for any sign of discomfort. It was great. A bit chilly, but we had fun, didn't we, buddy? Michael responded, ruffling Leo's hair. Leo nodded eagerly, oblivious to the tension. We saw big ducks, mommy, and a doggy. I forced a smile, playing along with their tails. That sounds lovely. I'm glad you both had a good time. As the day went on, I couldn't shake off the unease. Michael's deception, however small it seemed, had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. What was he doing in that unknown neighborhood? Why lie about it? For a whole week, my mind buzzed like a beehive, disturbed and restless. Each time I glanced at Michael, a wave of questions and doubts washed over me. But I masked my turmoil, waiting for the weekend, waiting for a chance to unravel the truth behind Michael's mysterious outings with Leo. Saturday arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Michael, as per the new routine, got ready to take Leo out. I watched them, my heart a knot of anxiety and suspicion. "Have a great time," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are you guys heading today?" Michael, securing Leo in his stroller, looked up and replied with ease, "Thought we'd check out that new playground on the east side. Leo's been asking about it." After they left, I waited, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, counting the minutes. As soon as I saw their location veer off course on Leo's smartwatch app, my resolve hardened. I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to confront whatever lay at the end of that GPS trail. Driving to the location felt surreal, like I was a character in a bad movie. The neighborhood was unfamiliar, a stark contrast to our own. I parked a block away and approached the address on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was a modest, two-story building with a small, well-kept garden. Hiding my nervousness, I stood across the street, pretending to be interested in my phone. Soon, I saw them, Michael and Leo, approaching the house. The door opened, and a woman appeared. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with a bright smile. Michael pulled her to him, possessively, and they kissed. I watched, hidden behind my sunglasses. A part of me wanted to lash out at them, push them away from each other. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, proof of the betrayal. I returned to my car, my mind a whirlwind of emotion. The drive home was a blur, each mile stretching out endlessly. Back home, the house felt emptier, even with Leo's toys scattered around. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on my phone. Michael, my husband, the man I trusted, was kissing another woman. The images burned in my mind, a stark, painful reality that I couldn't escape. When they returned, Michael was in high spirits, regaling me with stories of their day, the playground, the ice cream they had, Leo's laughter. I listened, nodding and smiling, a hollow feeling growing inside me. "And how was the new playground?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. "It was great," Michael replied, unaware of my internal turmoil. Leo made a new friend, and they played on the slides for ages. Monday morning arrived with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in a long time. As I watched Leo play, a plan formed in my mind. It was time to reclaim a part of myself that I had put aside. Once Leo was settled with his toys, I stepped into the other room and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. My heart raced as the phone rang. "Mr. Thompson, it's Anna. I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept the position of department head," I said, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "That's fantastic news, Anna. We're thrilled to have you back on board," Mr. Thompson's voice boomed with enthusiasm. After the call, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. I had taken the first step towards a new chapter in my life, one where I wasn't just a wife and mother, but also the professional I used to be. The day passed slowly, the weight of the impending confrontation with Michael heavy on my mind. When he finally came home that evening, his mood was off. He slammed the door a bit harder than usual and threw his keys on the table. "Anna, we need to talk. Why did Thompson call me today saying you took the job? The job that was supposed to be mine?" His voice was laced with anger and disbelief. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I did take the job, Michael. It's time for me to get back to my career." "Your career? What about our agreement? What about our family?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Our family will be fine. This is about me, Michael. I need this." My words were firm, unyielding. Michael laughed bitterly. "You need this? What about what I need? What I've been working towards?" I stared at him, the betrayal and pain I had felt over the past weeks boiling to the surface. What about what you've been doing, Michael? Behind my back? His laughter stopped, replaced by a confused scowl. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken. I know about her, Michael. I've seen you with her. His face paled as he looked at the photos, his anger dissolving into a mix of shock and guilt. Anna, I can't explain. No, Michael. I don't want to hear it. Not now. I cut him off, my voice shaking with emotion. You've broken our trust, and now I need to focus on myself and Leo. The decision to file for divorce, though heart-wrenching, was driven by a deep sense of betrayal and the need for justice. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Michael's infidelity, I stood my ground in the courtroom, demanding appropriate compensation and alimony. Michael fought fiercely, contesting every claim, every penny, as if trying to salvage his pride. The legal battle was draining, emotionally and mentally. But I remained resolute, bolstered by the knowledge that I was fighting not just for myself, but for a fair future for Leo and me. The court, recognizing the weight of the evidence, ruled in my favor. It was a bittersweet victory. The repercussions of our publicized divorce extended beyond the personal to the professional. The scandal of Michael's affair, once private, became a public spectacle. It wasn't long before the company we both worked for was embroiled in the controversy. Unable to weather the storm, they let Michael go. I remember the day he confronted me about it. His anger was palpable, his words sharp with blame. Are you happy now, Anna? I've lost my job because of this mess, he exclaimed, his voice tinged with bitterness. I met his gaze, my own resolve unwavering. You brought this on yourself, Michael. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. He scoffed, shaking his head. I can't believe how cold you've become. You're just sitting pretty while I have to scrounge for a lesser-paying job. His words stung, but I didn't let them sway me. This isn't about revenge, Michael. It's about doing what's right. It's about justice for what you did to our family. Our relationship, post-divorce, was anything but amicable. Michael's resentment towards me only grew with each alimony payment, with every job application that led nowhere. And while I took no pleasure in his struggles, there was a part of me that felt vindicated. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Life after the divorce felt like walking on unfamiliar terrain. Each step was cautious, yet with every passing day, I grew more confident in my new role as a single mother and a professional woman reclaiming her career. One crisp morning, as I was getting Leo ready for school, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes. Mommy, are you okay? You seem different. I knelt down to his level, brushing his hair back. I'm more than okay, Leo. I'm strong, and we're going to be just fine. He smiled, that pure, innocent smile of a child. I think you're like a superhero, Mommy. Like in my comics. I chuckled, hugging him close. Well, every superhero needs a sidekick, right? How about you be mine? Leo nodded enthusiastically, his laughter filling the room. It was moments like these that reminded me of the resilience and joy that still existed in our world, despite the shadows of the past. At work, I found myself diving into projects with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues noticed the change too. One day, my coworker, Jenna, commented on it during lunch. You seem different, Anna. More, I don't know, alive? Jenna observed, stirring her coffee. I smiled, sipping my tea. I feel like I've finally woken up, Jenna. Like I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in a long time. Jenna smiled back. Well, it suits you. Keep it up, boss lady. Life wasn't without its challenges, though. Michael and I had minimal contact, only speaking when necessary for Leo's sake. Our conversations were brief, to the point, and often tense. On one such occasion, as we discussed Leo's upcoming parent-teacher conference, Michael's frustration was evident. I can't make it to the meeting, Anna. I have to work, he said curtly over the phone. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone neutral. That's fine, Michael. I'll handle it. Leo's doing great in school, by the way. There was a pause. Thanks, Anna. Let me know if there's anything really important. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found solace in the small victories and joys of everyday life. Leo's laughter, the satisfaction of a job well done, the support of friends and family, these were the things that now defined my days. I realized that moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it, growing stronger because of it. It was about building a new life on my own terms, filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. As I looked at Leo, growing taller and more confident each day, I knew we were on the right path. Together, we were moving forward, stepping into a future that was ours to shape.